yes, of course. Just don't get too close to the forest.
Well, that went without saying. I felt like there should have been more ground rules than that. On our way here, there was a hill with a big tree on top. I figured we'd go play around there. I promise Sylph will head back home before it gets dark. And once your kid gets home, could you look out in the direction of that hill? If it looks like I haven't gone home, there's a good chance something's wrong. Could you please arrange a search if that happens? After all, there weren't any cell phones in this world. Establishing proper communication was important. It was impossible to avoid all potential trouble, but bouncing back quickly from problems was also important. This kingdom seemed fairly safe, but there was no telling where dangers might be lurking. With one look back at Laws, who was a bit dumbfounded, Sylph and I headed back for the tree on the hilltop. So, what did you want to play?
I'm not sure. I've never played with a friend before.
Sylph struggled to get the word friend out. I supposed he really never had one before. I felt so bad for him, but I didn't have friends either. Yeah, until recently I never really left the house myself. But anyway, what did you want to play? Sylph wrung his hands together and gazed up at me. We were roughly the same height, but because he kept himself hunched over, he had to look up at me.
So, how come you keep changing the way you talk?
Oh, depending on who you're talking to, it's rude not to speak properly. You need to show deference to your elders.
Deference.
Like the way I was speaking to your father before.
Hmm.
He sounded like he didn't quite understand, but he'd get it eventually. That was part of growing up.
More importantly, could you teach me that thing you did earlier?
What thing?
Like when you made warm water go all sploosh from your hands, and when you made that nice warm wind like whoosh.
Ah, yes, that. The magic I'd used to clear away the mud.
Is it difficult?
It's difficult, but with training, anyone can do it, probably. Lately, my magical reserves had grown so much I wasn't even sure how much I was expending, to say nothing of what the baseline was for people here. But then, this was just using fire to warm water. People probably couldn't just up and conjure hot water without an incantation, but with combined magic, anyone could reproduce the effects. That's why I was probably fine. Probably. Okay, then today, we'll begin your training. And so, Sylph and I played until the sun went down. When I got back home, Paul was furious. He stood imposingly in the entryway, hands set on his hips in an expression of his anger. I immediately tried to think of what I'd done wrong. The first thing that came to mind was that he'd discovered the precious panties that I'd secreted away. Father, I'm home.
Do you know why I'm upset?
I don't. First, I had to play dumb. I didn't want to bring unnecessary trouble upon myself in the event my prized possession hadn't been discovered.
Mr. Ito's wife came by earlier and told me that you punched their boy, Samal.
Who the heck were Mr. Ito and Samal? The names didn't ring a bell, so I had to think. I hadn't had much interaction with the townsfolk beyond basic introductions. I'd given them my name and gotten theirs in return. But I couldn't recall whether or not there had been an Ito among them. Wait, hold on. Was this today?
Yes.
The only people I'd run into today were Sylph, Laws, and those three punks. Was Samal one of those three boys then? I didn't punch him. All I did was throw some mud at him.
Do you remember what it was I told you earlier?
That men don't get strong just to brag about it?
That's right.
Aha! Now I got it. Come to think of it, that kid had said something about how he was going to let everyone know I was a demon lover. I don't know how that turned into him lying about me punching him, but either way, he was determined to badmouth me. I'm not sure what you heard, Father, but...
Oh, no, you don't. When you've done something wrong, the first thing you do is apologize.
Whatever lie this kid had told, my dad had clearly bought it. Crap! At this point, even if I told the truth about me saving Sylph from those bullies, it'd just sound like an outright lie. Still, all I could do was explain what happened from the very beginning. Okay, so I was walking down the road when...
No excuses.
Paul grew even more irate. He had no intentions of hearing me out. I could have just said sorry, but I felt like that wasn't going to be fair to Paul either. I didn't want him to make a habit of behaving like this with any younger brother or sister he might well make for me. This method of punishment wasn't fair.
Why aren't you saying anything?
Because if I do, you're just gonna yell at me not to make excuses.
What?
Before a kid can even say anything, you yell at them and make them apologize. Everything is so quick and easy with you adults. Must be nice.
Rudy.
A hot jolt of pain shot through my cheek. He hit me. I mean, I'd expected as much. Talk shit, get hit. That's why I firmly held my ground. I probably hadn't been hit in around 20 years. No, I'd gotten my ass beaten when I was kicked out of my house, so that made 5 years, I supposed. Father, I have always put in the utmost effort to be a good son. Not once have I ever talked back to you or mother, and I've always done my very best to do whatever you both tell me.
That has nothing to do with this.
It didn't look as though Paul had intended to strike me. There was a distinct look of consternation in his eyes. Whatever. That was good for me. Yes, it does. I've always done my best to keep your mind at ease and to get you to trust me, Father. You didn't listen to a word I said, and not only did you take the word of someone I don't know and yell at me, you even raised your hand to me.
But this Samal kid got hurt.
Hurt? That was news to me. Had I done that to him? If I had, maybe he was using it to sell his story. Well, too bad. I was justified in what I'd done. Assuming this whole thing about his being hurt wasn't just some dumb lie anyway. Even if it does wind up that it's my fault he got hurt, I'm not going to apologize for it. I didn't go against anything you taught me, and I'm proud of what I did.
Wait, hold on. What happened?
Oh, now he was suddenly curious. Hey, it was his own fault for deciding he wouldn't listen to me. What happened about not wanting to hear excuses? Paul's face twisted into a frown. It seemed I was close now. Please don't worry, Father. The next time I see 3 people going after someone who won't fight back, I'll ignore it. In fact, I'll jump in so that it's 4-on-1. I'll make sure that everyone around knows that the Greyrats take pride in bullying and ganging up on the weak. But once I grow up and leave home, I'll never use the Greyrat name again. I'll be too ashamed to let anyone know I belong to a family so horrid they ignored actual violence and accepted verbal abuse. Paul fell dead silent. His face turned red, then went pale, and there was conflict in his expression. Was he going to be mad? Or had I still not pushed him over the edge? You should quit while you're ahead, Paul. I know I don't look it, but I've spent over 20 years talking my way out of arguments. I can't win. If you had even one solid point to make, this might end in a draw, but justice is on my side this time. You don't have any hope of winning this one.
I'm sorry. I was wrong. Tell me what happened.
Yeah, see? Digging your heels in just makes things worse for the both of us. Remember? When you do something wrong, the first thing you do is apologize. Relieved, I explained the details of the situation as objectively as I could. I was making my way up the hill when I heard voices. There were 3 boys in an empty field pelting mud at another boy walking along the road. I hit them with mud once or twice until they backed down, and then they left while bad-mouthing me. Then, I used magic to clean the mud off the one boy, and we played together. So, yeah, if I'm going to apologize, this Samal kid needs to apologize to Sylph first. When you're hurt physically, you'll heal soon enough, but emotional hurt doesn't go away so quickly.
You're right. I had this all wrong. I'm sorry.
When I saw that, I recalled what Laws had told me earlier. Talking to you makes one feel like an underqualified parent. Had Paul's attempt at scolding me been him trying to show more of his paternal side? Well, if so, he'd lost this round. You don't need to apologize. In the future, if you think what I've done is wrong, by all means, scold me as you like. All I ask is that you hear me out first. There are going to be times when words don't cut it, or where it's just going to sound like I'm making excuses. But if I have something to say, please just try to see my side of things.
I'll keep that in mind. I don't expect that you'll be in the wrong in the first place, but...
When I am, use that as a learning opportunity for disciplining whatever younger brother or sister you wind up giving me in the future.
Yeah, I'll do that.
The man was clearly in poor spirits. Had I gone too far? I mean, losing an argument to your 5-year-old son? That'd take the wind out of my sails for sure. I supposed he was a bit young to be a father. By the way, Father, how old are you?
I'm 24.
I see. So, he would have been 19 when he got married and had me? I didn't know the average age for marriage in this world, but with things like monsters and war and such, Being an everyday occurrence, that sounded pretty appropriate. A man more than a decade my junior had gotten married, had a kid, and was now struggling with how to raise him. Given my 34-year history of indolent joblessness, you wouldn't think I'd be able to outdo him at much of anything. Ah, well. Father, could I bring Sylph over to play sometime?
Hmm? Oh, of course.
Satisfied with that response, I headed into the house with my father. I was glad he didn't hold any prejudice against demons.
My son was angry. The boy had never been one to display much overt emotion, but here he was silently fuming. How did it come to this? It started that afternoon when Mrs. Ito came by our house, furious. She brought along her son Samal, considered one of the neighborhood brats. There was a blue bruise around one of his eyes. As a swordsman who'd seen my fair share of battle, I knew right away that he'd taken a punch. His mother's story was long and rambling, but the gist was that my boy had punched hers. When I heard that, I was inwardly relieved. Ordinarily, I might have assumed my son had been playing outside, caught sight of Samal and his buddies playing, and tried to join them. But my boy wasn't like other kids. He was already a water saint magician at his age. He'd probably said something high and mighty, the other kids had fired back, and then they'd all gotten into a fight. My boy was pretty clever and mature for his age, but he was still a kid after all. Mrs. Ito continued to get red in the face and then went pale as she tried to make this out to be a major bust-up when it was just a quarrel among children in the end. And just by looking, you could tell that her son's injury wasn't even going to leave a mark. I'd scold my boy, and that would be the end of it. Children were bound to get into scuffles that turned to blows at some point, but Rudeus was far more powerful than other children. Not only had he been the disciple of the young water saint Roxy, I'd been training him since he was 3. Any fight he got into was sure to be one-sided. Things had gone okay this time, but if he ever got too hot-headed, he might wind up overdoing it. A smart kid like Rudeus ought to be able to deal with someone like Samal without throwing a punch. I needed to teach him that punching someone was a rash thing to do, and he needed to give it more thought before resorting to it. I needed to give him a bit of a harsh scolding. That had been the plan, anyway. How did it go so wrong? My son had no intention of apologizing to me whatsoever. Rather, he looked at me like one might look at an insect. I'm sure that from my son's perspective, they were having a fight on equal footing. But when someone has powers like his, they need to be aware of how strong they are. Besides, he'd hurt someone. I needed him to apologize. He was a smart kid. He might not understand now, but I was sure he'd arrive at the right answer in due time. With that in mind, I took a firm tone to ask what had happened, only for him to respond with condescension and sarcasm. It galled me, and in the heat of the moment I struck him. And here I was, trying to teach him a lesson about how people with power shouldn't resort to violence against people weaker than them. I'd hit him. I knew I was in the wrong, but I couldn't say that while trying to give my boy a lecture. I couldn't tell him not to do what I'd done moments earlier myself. While I struggled with my rattled composure, my son implied he'd done nothing wrong, and even said that if I had a problem with that, he'd leave home. I almost told him right there to go ahead. Go. But I managed to resist the urge. I had to. I was from a strict family myself with an overbearing father who'd tear into me without giving me a fair shake. My resentment had grown to the point where we had a huge fight that ended with me storming out of the house. My father's blood ran in my veins, the blood of a stubborn, unyielding curmudgeon. And it ran in Rudeus's veins as well. Just look at how stubborn he could be. He was definitely my kid. When I was told to get out, I gave my old man some tit for tat and did exactly as he said. I might drive Rudeus off as well. He said he'd wait until he grew up before leaving home, but if I told him to get out right now, I bet he would. I was sure it was in his nature. I heard that, not long after I left, my father took ill and died, and I heard he regretted our big fight until the very end, and I was glad to hear it. No, if I'm being honest, I regretted it too. If I told Rudeus to get out and he really did leave, I'd surely regret that as well. I had to be patient. Hadn't I learned from experience after all? Besides, on the day my child was born, I decided that I would never be a father like mine. You're right, I had this all wrong. I'm sorry. The apology came out naturally. Rudeus's expression softened, and he went on to explain what happened. He told me that he came across Molza's kid getting bullied and stepped in to help. Rather than punch anyone, he just tossed balls of mud. It could hardly be called a proper fight. If what Rudeus said was true, then what he'd done was a laudable thing, something he should be proud of. But instead of being praised for his actions, all he got was a father who wouldn't listen and struck him instead. When I was young, my father did the same thing to me so many times, never listening to my side of things, and always blaming me for not being a perfect son. Each time it happened, I felt so miserable and helpless. Well, whatever lesson I'd been trying to teach here, I'd failed. Ugh. But Rudeus didn't blame me for it. He even consoled me in the end. He was a good kid, almost too good. Was I even really his father? No, Zenith wasn't the type to have an affair, and besides, there was no father good enough to produce a child like him. Man, I never expected my seed would bear such strong fruit. More than pride, though, what I felt was an ache in my gut. Father, could I bring Sylph over to play sometime? Oh, of course. For now, I could at least be happy that my son had made his first friend.
Chapter 8. Obliviousness. I was now 6. My day-to-day life hadn't changed much. Mornings, I worked on my sword training. In the afternoon, if I had time, I'd do some field work, or practice magic under the tree on the hill. Recently, I'd been experimenting with ways to augment my swordsmanship with magic. I'd use a gust of wind to accelerate my sword swing, create a shockwave to quickly turn myself around, turn the ground to mud under an opponent's feet and mire them in place, and the like. Some people might think that my swordplay wasn't improving, since I was spending all my time on these little tricks, but I didn't agree. There were 2 ways to get better at fighting games. Keep practicing to improve, or find a different way to beat your opponent with your inferior skills. Right now, I was only thinking of the latter. Defeating Paul was the challenge at hand. Paul was a tough guy. He might have a ways to go in the parenting department, but as a swordsman, he was first-rate. If I were to focus on the first method and hone my physique to an absurd degree, I was sure I could beat him someday. However, I was 6 years old. In 10 years, I'd be 16, and Paul would be 35. 5 years after that, I'd be 21, and he'd be 40. So, yeah, I could beat him someday, but by then, it wouldn't mean anything. Defeating someone far older than you just got brushed off with claims of, oh, if this were back in my day, defeating Paul while he was still in his prime, that would mean something. Right now, he was 25 years old. He might have retired from the front lines, but he was currently at his physical peak. I wanted to beat him at least once within the next 5 years. With the blade, if possible, but if that proved unfeasible, then at least in a close combat situation where I could weave my magic into the mix. That was what I kept in mind as I headed out for my day's training. Under the tree atop the hill, Sylph came by, as he usually did.
Sorry, I hope I didn't keep you waiting.
Not at all. I just got here myself. That's how we'd start things off, like a couple, where one would wait for the other before we began. Back when we first started playing, Samal or some other local punks would come by. Sometimes older kids school-aged or in their early teens would be in the mix, but I drove them all off. Whenever I did, Samal's mother would come by my house to yell at me. That's when I figured out that Samal's mother wasn't so much invested in castigating children as she was fond of Paul. She was using scuffles between little kids as an excuse to come and see him. She was absurd. At the barest scratch, she'd march over to our place with her son in tow, which Samal didn't seem too pleased with. So, yeah, he wasn't faking injuries after all. Sorry for doubting him. I think they came after us about 5 times. Then, one day, they stopped coming our way altogether. Occasionally, we'd catch sight of them playing off in the distance, or we'd pass each other by, but neither side ever said anything. We'd apparently agreed to just ignore one another. With that, the issue seemed to be resolved, and the tree on top of the hill became our territory. Anyway, less about those punks and more about Sylph. What we referred to as playing was, in fact, magic training. If Sylph picked up a bit of spellcraft, he could fend off bullies by himself. In the beginning, Sylph was only able to cast 5 or 6 entry-level spells before getting short of breath, but a year had gone by. and his magical reserves had grown significantly. Now, he could train for half the day without an issue. I had very little belief in the idea that there were limits on a person's magical reserves anymore. Still, there was work needed on the spells themselves. Silp was especially poor with fire. He could handle wind and water magic quite deftly, but fire was his weak spot. I wondered why. Was it because he had elven blood? No, that wasn't right. During my lessons with Roxy, I'd learned about affinity schools and opposition schools. As the name suggested, some people had an affinity for certain schools of magic, while other schools inherently gave them trouble. Once I asked Sylph if he was afraid of fire. He shook his head and said he wasn't, but he showed me his palm where he had a burn scar. When he was about 3, he'd grabbed a metal skewer set over the hearth while his parents weren't looking. "I'm not scared anymore," he said, but I bet he still had some instinctual fear. Experiences like that had an impact on what became one's opposition schools. With dwarves, for instance, water was a very common opposition school. It wasn't a direct relationship between magic and what race you were. It was more of an environmental thing. Incidentally, I didn't have any opposition schools myself, due to my comfortable upbringing. You didn't really need fire to create warm water or a warm breeze, but since trying to explain that concept was a pain, I had Silph practice with fire as well. He had nothing to lose by being able to use it whenever he needed. For example, heat could be used to eradicate salmonella, so if you didn't want to die of food poisoning, you needed to use a bit of fire. Though I guessed even beginner-tier detoxification magic could neutralize most poisons. Despite his struggles, Silph didn't complain as he went through his training, probably because he wanted to back up his claims of not being afraid. He looked so cute with my wand, the one I got from Roxy in one hand and my magic textbook, the one I brought from home, in the other. His face steeled in concentration as he chanted. And if a boy like me was thinking that, he was sure to be super hot once he grew up. A father's heart is a jealous heart. The words rang clearly in my head as if they'd been said aloud, but I quickly shook my head and banished the thought. This wasn't a matter of jealousy. Besides, his being good-looking was part of my plan bait.
Hey, Rudy, what's this word here?
His voice banished the song from my head. He was gazing up at me, pointing at one of the pages in a textbook of magic, and that look he was giving me was a powerful one. I wanted to just wrap my arms around him and pull him into a kiss, but I managed to resist the urge. That says avalanche.
What does it mean?
When tremendous amounts of snow build up on a mountain, it can't bear its own weight and it all comes collapsing down. You know how when snow builds up on your roof, it sometimes comes flumping off? It's like a way bigger version of that.
Oh, wow. That sounds incredible. Have you ever seen one?
An avalanche? Of course I haven't. Not outside of TV, anyway. Sylph had me read from a textbook of magic. This was also part of teaching him how to read and write. No harm in learning literacy. There was no spell in this world that could do that for you. The lower the literacy rate, the more valuable being able to read was.
I did it.
He'd managed to cast the intermediate tier water spell Ice Pillar. A shaft of water sprang from the ground, glinting brightly in the sunlight. Hey, you're getting pretty good.
Uh-huh. But there's stuff you do that isn't written in here, huh?
Huh? It took me a few moments to realize he was talking about that thing I'd done with the warm water. I flipped briskly through a textbook of magic, then pointed at 2 entries. No, it's written in here. Waterfall and Heat Hand.
Huh?
I used both at the same time.
Huh. How can you chant 2 things at the same time?
Crap. I'd given myself away. He was right, of course. It was impossible to chant 2 incantations at once. Well, you create the waterfall without doing the incantation and use Heat Hand to warm it up. I think you could chant one of the spells if you wanted, and you could also put the water into a bucket and then heat it up after. I then demonstrated casting both spells without the incantations. Sylph watched me with wide eyes. Silent spellcasting was clearly a very high-level technique in this world. Roxy wasn't able to do it, and I'd heard that only one of the instructors at the University of Magic was capable of it.
Hey, teach me how to do that.
How to do what?
How to do magic without saying anything.
Apparently, Sylph had a different opinion from me. Maybe he saw the ability to do something in one go as better than alternating between 2 spells. I suppose that if teaching him that wound up being futile, he could just use combined magic anyway. Right. So, you know the feeling you get when you're going through the incantation for a spell? That feeling throughout your body that collects in your fingertips? Try doing that without saying the incantation. Once you feel like you've got the magical energy gathered up, let the spell you want to cast come to your mind and then force it out through your hands. Try to do something like that. Start with something like water ball.
Silp closed his eyes and began muttering and murmuring as he did a weird, wriggly little dance.
Trying to convey something you did through feelings was really hard. Silent incantation was something you did in your head. Different people probably had different methods that worked for them. Figuring that fundamentals were important, I'd had Silp use incantations the entire past year. Maybe the more you used incantations, the harder it was to go without. It'd be like trying to use your left hand to do something you'd always done with your right. Suddenly being told to switch was easier said than done.
I did it! Rudy, I did it!
Okay, maybe not then. Silp beamed with pride after managing to conjure a series of water balls. He'd been using incantations before, but it had only been a year, I suppose. I guess this was like removing the training wheels from a bicycle. Perhaps it was a matter of youthful perspicacity? Or maybe Silph had an innate talent?
Good. Now, try casting the spells you've learned so far without chanting the incantations.
Oh,
I felt a few drops of rain. I looked up and saw that, at some point, the sky had been overtaken by a dark bank of rain clouds. A moment later, the rain started pelting down. Normally, I watched the skies to make sure we'd be able to get home before it started raining, but today I'd been distracted by Silph's learning silent spellcasting, and I'd slipped up. Oh, wow! This is some pretty bad rain.
Rudy, I know you can make it rain, but can you also make it stop?
I can, but we're already soaking wet, and without rain, the crops aren't going to grow. I make a point not to mess with the weather unless it's going to cause problems.
We were already off and running by then. Since Silph's house was too far away, we made for the Greyrat estate. I'm home!
Hey-yo.
Welcome back, young Master Rudeus and your friend. I've already drawn some warm water for you. Please wash up and dry off on the second floor so that you don't catch a cold. The lord and lady of the house will be home soon, so I'll go get ready to tend to them. Will you be all right on your own?
Yes, I'll be fine. Lilia must have seen the downpour and expected I'd come home soaking wet. She was a woman of few words and didn't speak to me very much, but she was quite the talented maid. I didn't have to explain anything. She took one look at Silph's face, headed back into the house, and came back with another large cloth for him. The two of us took off our shoes, then dried off our heads and our bare feet before heading upstairs. Entering my room, I saw that a bucket filled with warm water had been set out. I undressed until I was fully naked, and then saw Silph fidgeting awkwardly, his face blushing bright red. What's the matter? You need to get out of your clothes or you'll catch a cold.
Huh? Oh, yee.
But still, he didn't move. Was he shy about getting naked in front of someone? Or maybe he'd never undressed himself before? I mean, he was only 6. Here, lift up both your hands.
Okay.
I helped Silph lift his hands overhead, then peeled off his sopping wet coat, exposing his stark white skin, along with his lack of muscular definition. I reached for his lower garments next, but he grabbed hold of my arm.
No, not that.
Was he embarrassed about me seeing him? I was like that too when I was little. Back in kindergarten, we'd have to get naked and shower when it was time to swim in the pool. But it was always a little awkward being exposed to people in the same age bracket. In any case, Silph's hand was freezing. He really was going to catch a cold if we didn't hurry. I grabbed his trousers and forcefully pulled them down.
Hey, stop it.
He squeaked, hitting me on the head as I took hold of his baggy children's underpants. I looked up and he was gazing fixedly down at me, tears in his eyes. I promise I'm not going to laugh.
That's not Earth?
He was being quite obstinate. In all the time I'd known him, Silph had never so staunchly refused to do something. I was a little shocked. Did elves maybe have some rule about not being seen naked? If that was the case, trying to forcibly strip him was a bad call. All right, just make sure to change after we're done. Wet underpants are pretty gross, and once they get cold, you'll wind up with stomach problems.
I removed my hands, and Silph gave me a teary-eyed nod. MFM, he was so cute. I wanted to get even closer to this adorable boy. And as I thought that, my mischievous streak suddenly sprang to the fore. After all, it was hardly fair that I was the only one naked. Gotcha! I snatched hold of his underwear with my hands, then yanked them down in one fell swoop. Sylph shrieked. A moment later, he squatted and curled up into himself to hide his body from sight. But in that moment, what flashed before my eyes was not the pure short sword to which I'd grown recently accustomed, nor, naturally, was it a dark blade bearing ominous sigils. No, what was there rather, what wasn't there was, well, replaced by something that shouldn't have been there. It was something I'd seen many times over my past life on my computer monitor. One of those. That's what Sylph had. He was a she. My vision went white. What I'd just done was not okay at all.
Rudeus, what are you doing?
I came to my senses to see Paul standing there. When had he gotten home? Had he come into the room because he'd heard Sylph cry out? I stood petrified. Paul did likewise. There was Sylph, hunched and curled up, naked and sobbing. There I was, also naked, with her underpants clutched in my hand. There was no talking my way out of this one. It was raining just outside, but it sounded so very far away.
I came home after work to find my son assaulting the young girl that he always liked spending time with. I wanted to tear into him on the spot, but I managed to stay level. Maybe this was another case where there were circumstances I wasn't aware of. I didn't want to repeat my previous failure. For now, I decided to put the sobbing girl in the care of my wife and the maid, while I helped my son clean up and dry off. Why were you doing something like that?
I'm sorry.
When I'd scolded him a year earlier, he seemed completely unwilling to apologize, but now the apology came right out, and he turned meek, shriveling up like sautéed spinach. I asked you for a reason.
Well, they were soaking wet. I figured I should take them off.
But she didn't like that, did she?
No.
I told you to be nice to girls, didn't I?
You did. I'm sorry.
Rudeus had no excuse for himself. I wondered if I'd been the same at his age. I felt like whatever I might have said would have been full of buts and UCs. I'd had an excuse for everything when I was a kid. My son was more honest than that. Well, I suppose that, at your age, it's natural to want to pick on girls, but you can't do that.
I know. I'm sorry. I won't do it again.
Something about seeing my boy so utterly dejected made me feel guilty. That fondness for women came from me. When I was little, I was full of youthful vigor and virility, and incessantly chased after cute girls who caught my eye. I managed to keep myself more subdued these days, but I really couldn't restrain myself in the past. Maybe I'd pass that on to my son. Of course, an intellectual boy like him would struggle with these instincts. How hadn't I noticed it? But no, this wasn't the time to sympathize with him. I needed to give him proper guidance based on my experiences. Don't apologize to me. You need to apologize to Sylphiette, right?
Is Sylph gonna forgive me?
You don't apologize just because you hope to be forgiven right away. At this, my boy looked even more despondent. In hindsight, it was clear he'd been infatuated with the girl from the very beginning. The whole fuss from a year ago was because he decided to protect her, and all he'd gotten for it was a smack from his old man. Even after that, they'd played together almost every day, my son protecting her from the other kids. He had to keep up with both sword and magic training, but still made as much time for her as he could. He was so close to her that I think he even offered to give her his wand and magic textbook, which he valued more than anything. I understood why he was feeling so glum at the idea that she might hate him now. I'd dealt with similar rejection in my day. Hey, it'll be all right. If you'd never been mean to her before this, and if your apology comes from the heart, I'm sure she'll forgive you.
My son's face brightened at that, if only a tiny bit. He was a smart kid. He'd messed up this time, but he'd recover from it soon enough. Hell, maybe he'd find a way to turn this around completely and win her heart. It was both a promising and foreboding prospect. I'm sorry, Sophie. Your hair's short, and so I thought you were a boy this whole time.
I'd always thought our son was perfect, but maybe he was a lot dumber than I'd thought. And that was the first time I'd ever thought that.
After a lot of apologies, compliments, and reassurances, I got her to forgive me somehow. Since it turned out Sylph was a girl, I figured I'd call her Sylphie from now on. Apparently, her full name was Sylphiette. Paul looked at me as if he were dumbfounded by how I ever mistook such a cute little thing for a boy. But I never expected Sylphie would actually turn out to be a girl. I suppose it really wasn't my fault. When we first met, her hair was shorter than mine. Like, not cut fashionably short or anything, but also not so short that she looked like a monk or something. She'd also never dressed in anything that looked like girls' clothing, just a plain shirt and trousers. If she'd worn a skirt, I wouldn't have made that mistake. Okay, I needed to calm down and think. She'd been getting bullied because of the color of her hair. Maybe that was why she'd cut it so short, so it wouldn't stand out as much. And if bullies came after her, her only option was to run fast as she could, which would explain why she wore trousers instead of a skirt. Learning that Sylphie was a girl changed my attitude. Seeing her in her boyish getup made me feel kinda weird. You're really cute, Sylphie. Maybe you should try growing your hair out?
Huh?
I figured it'd be easier for me to see her in a new light if she changed her appearance, hence the suggestion. Sylphie may have hated her hair, but that emerald green color would look dazzling in the sunlight. I definitely wanted her to try growing it out, and if possible, for her to style it in either pigtails or a ponytail.
No.
Ever since that incident, Sylphie had been wary of me. In particular, she conspicuously avoided physical contact. Since she always went along with whatever I'd proposed, I was kind of shocked. All right, did you want to practice some more silent spellcasting today?
Sure.
I forced a smile to mask my feelings. Sylphie was my only friend. At least we could still play together. There might be some lingering awkwardness, but at least we were still hanging out together. For today, I told myself that would be good enough. My skills, according to this world's standards, were as follows. Swordplay, sword god style, beginner. Water god style, beginner. Attack magic, fire, advanced. Water saint, wind, advanced. Earth, advanced. Healing magic, healing intermediate. Detoxification, beginner. Healing magic was divided into the same 7 ranks as usual and comprised 4 schools: healing, protection, detoxification, and divine strike. But these schools didn't come with cool-sounding titles like Fire Saint or a Water Saint. You were simply called a Saint-tier healing caster, or a Saint-tier detoxification caster. Healing magic, as the name implied, was used to heal injuries. Beginners would expend most of their efforts simply to close up wounds, but it was said that people at the Imperial level could regrow lost limbs, but not even someone at the Divine level could bring a dead creature back to life. Detoxifying magic helped to purge poisons and disease. At higher levels, one could create toxins, craft antidotes, and the like. Spells that dealt with abnormal status effects were all saint level or higher, and were apparently quite difficult. Protection magic included spells to increase one's defenses and create barriers. In simple terms, it was a form of support magic. I wasn't too clear on the details, but my understanding was that it included things like increasing your metabolism to heal minor wounds, or generating chemicals in the brain to numb you to pain. Roxy couldn't use that kind of magic. It was rather inconvenient that you couldn't silently cast a spell without understanding the theory behind it. Elemental attack magic, for instance, worked on scientific principles. I wasn't sure what principles, if any, applied to other spell types. I knew magic was like some kind of all-powerful element, but I didn't know how to rework it into doing just anything. Take psychokinesis, for example. The ability to make objects float and come to your hand and all that stuff. Even if I thought that was something that could be reproduced with magic, I had no way of finding out how to reproduce the effect, since I'd never had psychic powers. In retrospect, maybe I had wasted way too much of my past life. No, it wasn't a waste. Sure, I didn't have a job or go to school, but it wasn't like I'd spent the whole time hibernating. I'd immersed myself in all sorts of video games and hobbies while everyone else was busy with things like studying or working. And all the knowledge, experience, and perspectives I'd gained from those games would be useful in this world. Or, well, they ought to be. They hadn't really been so far. One day, I was outside doing sword training with Paul when I unwittingly let out a loud sigh. I thought my father would be angry with me for being so obviously out of breath, but he flashed a grin instead.
Hey, what's the matter, Rudy? Feeling down because Sylphie doesn't like you?
That wasn't what I'd sighed about, though. Granted, Sylphie was one of the things weighing on my mind. Well, yeah, sword practice isn't going so well. Sylphie is mad at me. Yeah, I sighed.
Paul grinned again and thrust his wooden practice sword into the ground. He leaned against it and looked directly at me. Oh, please tell me he's not about to make fun of me.
Want some advice from your dad?
I hadn't expected that. I thought about it some. Paul, my dad, was a popular guy with the ladies. Zenith was definitely what you'd call beautiful. Plus, there was the whole thing with Mrs. Ato. Sometimes he'd touch Lilia's butt, and the look on her face suggested she didn't mind at all. He had to have something, some way to keep girls from hating you. Granted, Paul was more the kind of person who acted on intuition, so I wasn't sure I'd understand him, but if nothing else, it'd be food for thought. Yes, please.
How to put this?
Should I go and lick her boots?
No, that's wow. You got all servile all of a sudden.
If you don't tell me, I'll let Mother know how you were making eyes at Lilia.
This is a very high-pressure situ-whoa. Hey, you saw that? Okay, you saw that. Okay. I'm sorry for acting high and mighty.
I'd only mentioned Lilia to bait the conversation into going my way, but was he actually having an affair? I mean, if he was, then hey, whatever. That was all part and parcel of being a ladies' man. I'd have to ask him how to play the part properly.
Listen, Rudy. So, about women, they like things about men that make them strong, but they also like some of our softer aspects.
Oh, I'd heard as much before. Did that have something to do with maternal instincts or whatever?
Now, you've only been showing Sylphiette the things that make you strong, haven't you?
Maybe? I haven't really noticed one way or the other.
Think about it. If someone clearly stronger than you came at you with their intentions for you on full display, how would you feel?
Scared, I guess.
Exactly. That's why you need to show her your softer aspects, too. Use your strengths to protect her, and she'll protect your weaknesses. That's how you keep a relationship going.
Oh, that was simple to understand. I didn't think a vague guy like Paul was capable of such an explanation. You couldn't just be strong, but you also couldn't just be weak. Only by being a little of both could you pull in the girls. But how do I show her where I'm weak?
That's simple. You're worried about stuff right now, aren't you? Take what you're bottling up and share it with Sylphiette. Say, I've got a lot of stuff wearing me down, and having you avoid me is making me worry, or something along those lines. If things go well, she'll bridge the gap. She might even console you. So, cheer up. You've got a friend who'll make things right with you. Anybody would be happy with that.
Aha! Now I got it. I could use my attitude to control other people's emotions. Of course! But wait. What if things don't work out?
If that happens, come to me. I'll teach what you do next.
Wait, this was a multi-stage plan? This guy was a total schemer. Oh, okay. I get it. Anyway, I'll be back.
Good luck.
Unable to wait any longer, I dashed off. As I left, I could have sworn I heard him say one final thing.
What the hell did I just teach my 6-year-old son?
I got to our spot under the tree earlier than usual, so Sylphie hadn't shown up yet. I'd brought my wooden practice sword, as always, but I hadn't cleaned up before heading out like I usually did, so I was all sweaty. What should I do? There was nothing to be done, really. Times like this, I just had to do mental exercises. I swung my sword around as I ran through some simulations in my head. I'd shown her my strengths. Now I had to show my weaknesses. Weakness? How was I supposed to do that again? Ah, right. Let her see that I was feeling down. But how? When was the right time? Should I just come out with it right away? That seemed like it'd be weird. Should I try to work it into the flow of the conversation? Could I do that, though? No, I would. Caught up with thinking about this while idly swinging my sword, I must have loosened my grip because the sword slipped right out of my hand. Whoops! I followed its path as it skittered along the ground, landing right at Sylphie's feet. My mind went completely blank. Crap! What should I do? What should I say?
What's the matter, Rudy?
Well, you're really cute, and
No, not that. The sweat.
Huh. Sweat? Whatcha mean? I approached, causing her to flinch and recoil. As usual, she wouldn't let me get within a certain distance of her. It was like we were the same poles of two different magnets. Sweat dripped off my forehead. My breathing leveled out. Good. I reached down to pick up the wooden sword in dejection, then struck a remorseful pose, facing away from her. I allowed my shoulders to slump and let out a heavy sigh. Man, I feel like you're really cold lately, Sylphie. For a few moments, there was silence. Had I done okay? Did I do it right, Paul? Should I have made myself even more vulnerable? Or was I being too obvious? Suddenly, something grabbed my hand from behind. The sensation was warm and soft, and I looked to see Sylphie there. Oh, she was close. Sylphie hadn't gotten this close to me in a long while. Paul, I did it!
You know, Rudy, you've been acting really strange recently.
That snapped me back to my senses. I mean, she was right. She didn't need to say it for me to know that I hadn't been treating her the same way I had before. From Sylphie's perspective, this change must have come completely out of nowhere. As sudden a switch as the moment a young woman who's looking for marriage prospects discovers you've got a fair bit of money. I wasn't acting like this because I enjoyed it. But how else was I supposed to deal with her? I couldn't well treat her the same way I had before. There was no way I wouldn't be nervous around a cute girl like her. A cute, young girl around my age. I hadn't the foggiest how to be friends with someone like that. If I'd been an adult, or Sylphie more grown up, I could have used my know-how of adult visual novels. But she was a girl my age. And sure, I'd played games where you could romance girls around her age. But besides, that wasn't even the sort of relationship I wanted with her. We were both way too young. All that aside, this was a girl who had been bullied. Back when I'd been bullied, I didn't have anyone on my side. So, I wanted to be there for her. Boy or girl, it didn't matter. That much hadn't changed. Still, treating her the same way was just too hard. I was a boy, and I wanted to forge a good relationship with a cute girl. But, like for later on, I just didn't know what to do. Maybe I should have asked Paul about this, too.
I'm sorry, but Rudy, I don't hate you.
Sylphie? I must have had a pathetic look on my face because she patted my head. Then, Sylphie flashed me a wonderful carefree smile. It was so soft. I was moved almost to the point of tears. I had clearly been in the wrong, but she was the one who'd apologized. I took her hand and gripped it tightly in mine. Her face blushed red with surprise even as she gazed at me.
So could you please just act normal?
Hidden away within me was the power I needed to make this decision. And so, I did. That's right. What she hoped for was normalcy. A relationship the same as the one we'd always had. So, to the best of my ability, I would treat her normally, and do my best not to frighten or fluster her. In other words, I would become one of them. I supposed I might as well. It was time to be an oblivious protagonist. Chapter 9, Emergency Family Meeting. Zenith had learned she was pregnant. I was going to have a little brother or sister. Our family was growing. Oh, Rudy, you lucky guy. For a few years now, Zenith had been worried about her inability to conceive another child. I'd heard her mutter and sigh on occasion about how maybe she couldn't bear children anymore. But about a month earlier, there was a shift in her food cravings, along with nausea, vomiting, and a general sense of fatigue. In other words, symptoms of classic morning sickness. The feelings were familiar, and a trip to the doctor confirmed that her self-diagnosis was almost certainly correct. The Greyrat household was abuzz at the announcement. What will we name the baby if it's a boy? What will we name it if it's a girl? We still have rooms, right? Oh, we can use Rudy's old clothes and hand-me-downs. There was no end to the topics to be discussed. It was a day of bubbling joy and countless smiles. I was honestly very happy, hoping that I'd wind up with a little sister. A younger brother might break all of my precious things with a baseball bat. The problems didn't arise until about a month later. Our maid, Lilia, had discovered that she was pregnant as well.
I'm so sorry. I'm pregnant.
In that instant, the Greyrat family froze. Who was the father? But, given the circumstances, nobody could bring themselves to ask. Everyone had realized it on some level at least. Lilia was our maid. She sent almost all of her payback home to her family. Unlike Paul, who frequently headed into town to help settle problems, or Zenith, who helped out at the local clinic at certain times, Leah almost never left the house unless it was on work-related duties, and nobody had heard rumors about her developing an especially close relationship with anyone. I knew the truth, though. Ever since Zenith had gotten pregnant, Paul had been forced to go without sex, and he was an especially lustful man who'd been sneaking into Lilia's room in the middle of the night. If I'd been an actual kid, I would have thought they were just playing cards or something. Unfortunately, I knew all too well what was really going on. They weren't playing any game of old maid. There was playing around, and there was a maid involved, but this was no mere round of cards. Still, I wish they'd been more careful, which is probably what both of them were thinking too. Part of me wanted to say that to Paul with a completely deadpan face, but I wasn't sure if the concept of contraception was even a thing in this world. And obviously it wasn't like I wanted to tear the whole family apart by spilling the beans. Also, if I messed with the maid, I was pretty sure she'd never forgive me. Besides, I owed Paul for helping me through that incident with Sylphie. I'd let this one slide. Being a guy who all the chicks were hot for seemed tough. If they suspected him, I'd cover for him. Heck, I'd lie to give him an alibi if I had to. Having come to that decision, I looked over at Paul, letting him know with my eyes that he had nothing to worry about. At the same time, however, Zenith shot a look right over at Paul, her shocked assumption plain on her face. Conveniently enough, our gazes both fell upon Paul as one bearing down on him.
Sorry? This child is, probably mine.
Good grief. Really? Well, no. I suppose I should commend the man for being honest. Seeing as how he constantly told me to be honest and be a real man, and be sure to protect women, and never impugn your sense of honor, and other high and mighty stuff like that day in and day out, the least he could do was practice what he preached. Well, whatever. I couldn't say I hated him for it. Anyway, this really was the worst case scenario. That sentiment solidified as I watched Zenith draw herself up to her full height, her face livid, her hand rising into the air, and thus was convened an emergency family meeting, with Lilia included. It was Zenith who first broke the silence. She had the authority in this meeting.
So, what are we gonna do?
From what I could see, she was as calm as anything. Instead of going into a fit of hysterics over how her husband had cheated on her, she contented herself with a single smack. A red mark like a maple leaf spread across Paul's cheek.
After I've assisted with the lady of the house's birth, I assume I would take my leave from your home.
She seemed rather composed, too. Maybe this was a common occurrence in this world? The maid becomes her employer's mistress. If people object, she just leaves the house. A pitiful story like that would normally turn me on, but under the circumstances, I didn't so much as twitch. I still had principles, unlike Paul. Paul was all huddled up in a corner. So much for paternal dignity.
What about the child?
I was thinking I would give birth here in Fitoa and then raise the baby back in my hometown.
You're originally from the South, yes?
That's right.
You're going to be physically exhausted after the birth. You'll be in no condition to make a long journey.
Perhaps so, but I have nowhere else to turn.
The Fito region was in the northeastern part of the Asura kingdom. Based on my understanding, to reach what was considered the South in this context took close to a month and required switching between multiple stagecoaches. That, however, was for a typical traveler. Lilia had no money. She couldn't afford to ride on stagecoaches and would have go on foot, even if the Greyrats paid for her travel expenses. That didn't make it any less risky. She'd be a woman traveling by herself, having recently given birth. If I were a bad guy and spotted her, what would I do? I would attack her. She was an obvious sitting duck, practically begging for someone to take a shot at her. Take the child hostage. Keep the mother distracted with empty promises. Meanwhile, take all her money and possessions. I'd gathered that slavery was a thing in this world. So in the end, I'd sell off both mother and child, and that would be that. Even if people said that the Asura kingdom was the safest nation in the world, that didn't mean it was completely devoid of evildoers. I bet there was still a high likelihood of them being attacked. And like Zenith had said, there was also the physical aspect to consider. Even if Lilia did have the stamina to make it, what about the child? Could a newborn handle a month-long journey like that? Probably not. Of course, if Lilia didn't survive the journey, neither would the child. Even if she simply fell ill, if she didn't have money to see a doctor, she was done for. I suddenly had the mental image of Lilia lying dead in the midst of a blizzard, baby cradled in her arms. I, for one, didn't want to see her suffer that sort of fate.
Dear, surely she could just stake.
You keep your mouth shut.
He shrank like a scolded child. This was definitely one instance where he had no right to speak. Paul was useless here. Zenith chewed on her nails with a look of consternation. She was clearly conflicted as well. She didn't want Lilia to suffer. On the contrary, the two were quite good friends. Considering how they'd spent the last 6 years running this household together, it was probably fair to say they were best friends. Well, except for the part about how Lilia was now carrying Paul's child. Mushoku Tensei, cast by Artale Studio. Please subscribe to our channel if you enjoy listening. Allie, Zenith would have unquestionably sheltered her and allowed her to... No, she would have insisted she raise the child in our home. Based on the conversation, I surmised that abortion wasn't easily accessible in this world. Zenith appeared to be grappling with two separate emotions, her fondness for Lilia and her feelings of betrayal. Considering the circumstances, I thought Zenith was pretty incredible for being able to set aside her emotions about the latter. If I were her, I'd have given in to jealousy. The fact that Zenith was able to keep her cool seemed connected to Lilia's own attitude. She hadn't tried to talk her way out of anything and had taken full responsibility for betraying a household she'd served for so long. If you asked me, though, it was Paul who ought to be taking responsibility here. It was weird to lay the blame solely on Lilia. Very, very weird. I couldn't allow us to part on such weird terms. I decided that I was going to help Lilia. I was indebted to her. We didn't do very much together, and she hardly ever talked to me, but she'd always been there, helping out. She set aside a towel for me to wipe away the sweat when I was practicing my swordplay. She drew me a bath when I got caught in the rain. She fetched me blankets on chilly nights. She rearranged the shelves when I put a book back in the wrong space. But most importantly, more than anything else, she knew about my treasured panties and had kept silent about them. Yes, Lilia knew about those. This happened back when I still thought Sylphie was a boy. It had been raining, and so I was up in my room reading and reviewing my botanical encyclopedia when Lilia came in and started to clean up. I was so engrossed in reading that I didn't notice when her cleaning took her close to my secret hiding place on the shelf. By the time I did realize, it was too late. Lilia already had my precious panties in her hand. I'd been so stupid. For nearly 20 years, I'd been a complete shut-in, leaving my stuff scattered around, unconcerned about anyone else stumbling across it. I even had my folder for porn right on my desktop. Maybe my skill for hiding things had gotten rusty because of that, but I hadn't expected my stuff would be found this easily. I'd actually done a pretty decent job of hiding it, too. Was this a superpower that maids had? Deep inside myself, I'd felt something start to crumble. I could hear the blood beginning to drain from my head. The questioning began.
What are these?
Yeah, what are those? Ah, ha, ha, ha.
They smell.
Yeah, I think it's maybe like sesame oil or something like that, maybe, yeah?
Whose are these?
I'm sorry. They're Roxy's.
Shouldn't you have them laundered?
Oh no, don't wash them. Lilia wordlessly returned my prized panties back to their sacred hiding place. Then, as I quivered in fear, she left the room. That evening, I braced myself for the inevitable family meeting, except it never came. I spent the long night shuddering fearfully in my futon, but even when morning came, there was nothing. She hadn't told anyone. I owed it to her to repay that debt. Mother? How come everyone's acting so glum about how I'm going to have 2 new siblings at once? I wanted to give off the naive impression of, hey, if Lily is pregnant, that means our family's getting even bigger. Hooray! Why is everyone so upset about that?
Because your father and Lilia did something they shouldn't have.
An unfathomable rage mixed in with those words. But it wasn't directed at Lilia. Zenith knew full well who bore the brunt of the blame here. Oh, I see. But is Lilia allowed to go against father's wishes?
What do you mean by that?
This wasn't fair to Paul, but hey, he was reaping what he'd sown. Here. I'd have to single-handedly try to cover up for Lilia's indiscretions. My bad, Paul. I'd have repay him for Sylphie some other time. Well, I know that father has some leverage over her.
What? Is this true?
Lilia was as stone-faced as ever, though she did raise a curious eyebrow, as if my assertion had been on the mark. Did Paul actually have something on her? Based on the usual stuff I'd heard and seen, it seemed more likely to me that Lilia had something on Paul, but... no, never mind. I had my opening here. A while ago, I got up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, and as I was passing by Lilia's room, I heard father say something like, "If you don't want me to tell anyone, spread your legs."
Huh. Damn it, Rudy. What the hell are?
You shut up, Lilia. Is this true?
Actually...
Was I actually on the mark? Or was she just playing along?
Ah, I see. You can't bring yourself to say it out loud.
Paul's eyes blinked over and over.
His mouth opening and closing repeatedly like a goldfish's, no words coming out. Perfect. Time to wrap this all up.
Mother, I don't think Lilia is to blame.
I suppose not.
I think Father is to blame.
I suppose so.
It isn't right that Lilia is in such a hard position because of something that was Father's fault.
I suppose.
My mother's responses were more non-committal than I'd hoped. I just needed to push a little further.
I have fun playing with Sylphie every day, so I think it'll be really nice that my little brother or sister will have someone the same age to be friends with.
I suppose. Yes.
And besides, Mother, they'd both be little brothers or sisters to me.
All right, Rudy. I get it. You win.
Jeez, way to give me a hard time about it, Mom.
Lilia, I insist you stay with us. You're family at this point. I am not letting you do something as foolish as leave.
And that seemed to be the final word on the matter. Paul's eyes went wide. Leah brought her hand to her mouth, holding back her tears. All right then, that was all done and settled.
And so, with all of the responsibility laid squarely on Paul, we got through things without further issue. By the end, Zenith was looking at him with the cold dispassion of someone who was about to slaughter a pig.
My balls tensed up in anticipation of what punishment she might unleash upon him. With that look still in her eyes, though, Zenith simply returned to her room. Lilia was crying, her face blank and expressionless, but tears streamed from her eyes. Paul looked conflicted about whether he should put his arms around her or not. For the time being, I was going to let the playboy do his thing. I followed after Zenith.
If this situation wound up with her and Paul getting divorced, that would create its own host of problems.
I knocked on the bedroom door, and Zenith poked her head out.
Mother, the stuff I said earlier was a lie I just made up. Please don't hate Father.
For a moment, Zenith was taken aback, but then she grimaced and gently patted my head.
I know, sweetie. I would never have fallen in love with a man who was that terrible. Your father's got a weakness for women, so I'd prepared myself for the day something like this might happen. It was just a bit sudden, is all.
Father has a weakness for women?
Yes, not as much in more recent times, but back in the day he was pretty indiscriminate. You might have older brothers and sisters out there that we don't know about, Rudy.
She exerted a bit more pressure with the hand that was ruffling my hair.
Make sure you don't grow up to be someone like that, okay, Rudy? Make sure you treat Sylphie real nice, okay, Rudy?
Ah, of course, Mother. That hurts.
It almost felt like she'd nailed down what I was going to go on to do in the future. Still, things would be all right if they stayed like this. Where they went from here, that was all on Paul now. Still, it was tough knowing that my dad was such a damn hedonist. No more second chances from me, senor. The day after that, sword practice was exceedingly rough. I was able to keep pace with him and all. I just wished he wouldn't take it out on me like that.
I'll just come out and say it. I was the one who seduced Paul. I had no intention of doing such a thing when I first came to this house.
But to hear them moaning night after night, to clean a room that smelled of a man and woman who were very satisfied I had my needs, and they were building up. At first I was able to deal with those needs on my own. Watching Paul practicing swordplay in the yard every morning, however, stoked the fire inside me that had never completely died. Watching him reminded me of our first time we were still so young, back when he was staying at the training hall where we practiced. Paul snuck into my room at night and forcibly had his way with me. I didn't dislike him, but I certainly didn't love him back. It wasn't exactly the most romantic encounter. I'd cried, at first. The next person who made advances toward me, though, was that bald, fat minister. That certainly put into perspective how much better things with Paul had been. Also, when I heard that Paul was hiring a maid, I figured I could use what had happened back then as leverage in my negotiations. Paul was a much manlier fellow upon our reunion than he'd been back then. Any trace of boyishness had disappeared, replaced with the look of a man who'd refined himself both physically and mentally. At the sight of him, one of the first thoughts to cross my mind was that the past 6 years had certainly been kind to him. At first, Paul didn't try to make any moves on me. Every so often, though, he'd treat me to a sneaky grope that just got me all the more worked up. I was able to resist, but I was fully aware that I was walking a very thin line. All of that came crashing down when Zenith got pregnant. Knowing that Paul had an abundance of libido, I got it in my head that this was my opportunity. I saw my chance, and I invited Paul into my room. So, really was my own fault. I thought of my own pregnancy as punishment. My punishment for giving in to my lust, and for betraying Zenith. But I was forgiven. Rudeus forgave me. That clever child, he managed to correctly deduce what had happened, lead the conversation precisely where it needed to go, and even bring things to an elegant compromise. He was so level and calculating about it, as if he had some similar prior experience to go on. It was an unsettling no, best to quit while I was still ahead. Rudeus weirded me out, and so I made a point to avoid him as much as I could. The boy was smart, he probably realized I was avoiding him. Even so, he had saved me. I couldn't imagine that felt good for him, but he chose me and my child over his own feelings. I would owe him for that for the rest of my life. He was someone who deserved my respect. Yes, he did deserve it. I would owe him a debt for as long as I lived. So once the child in my belly was safely born, and once they were grown up, I would see that they made their way into young Master Rudeus's service.
Several months passed without anything especially major happening. Sylphie was growing remarkably fast. She was now able to cast intermediate-level spells without incantations, and she was reaching the point where she could pull off some pretty subtle effects. In comparison, my skill with the sword was relatively unchanged. I'd gotten decent, but I hadn't managed to win a single round against Paul so far, so it was difficult to get too excited about my progress. Lilia's attitude had softened as well. Previously, she'd always been on her guard around me, but since I'd been messing around with magic since I was a little kid, that was only natural. While nothing had really changed about her lack of overt emotion, I felt her words and her mannerisms now bore an overwhelming sense of reverence for me. I got that she was happy about my help, but I wished she'd tone it down. If nothing else, ever since that incident, Leah had begun to talk to me a little mostly old stories about Paul. Apparently, they had both studied swordplay at the same training hall many years back. She told me things like how Paul had been very talented back then, but hated to practice, or how Paul would skip training in order to gallivant around town, or how Paul had forced himself on her in the middle of the night and taken her virtue, or how Paul had eventually fled the training hall. Bit by bit, Lilia opened up to me about all that. The more she told me about the past, the more my opinion of Paul dropped. He was a rapist and a cheater. He was trash. Still, it wasn't like he was rotten to the core. He was childish, irresponsible, and something about that seemed to tickle women's maternal instincts. He tried to be a good, strict father to me, but he wasn't good at keeping up that facade. When he set his mind to it, he mostly just came across as frank and straightforward, and I knew for sure he wasn't a bad guy through and through.
Come on, look at me. Don't you want to grow up to be a cool guy like your dad?
The nerve of this guy, honestly. Is it cool to be a guy who cheats on his wife and risks tearing his family apart? At the look on his face, I resolved to be a bit more careful. I was supposed to be young and oblivious. I didn't cheat on anyone girls could come to me of their own accord. That's how I'd handle things. Look, if that bothers you so much to hear, could you please keep your hands off of anyone who isn't Mother?
Oh, other than Lilia, right?
This man had learned nothing. Next time, Mother might move back in with her family without saying a word, you know?
Gah.
Was this guy hoping to build himself a harem? To have some secret retirement out in the sticks, where he had a beautiful wife, a maid he could get handsy with whenever he wanted, and a son to train in the way of the sword? Huh, that made me kind of jealous. That was probably the best ending from his perspective. It'd be like winding up with both Louise and Siesta at the end of that one light novel series. Maybe, rather than being oblivious, I should try to learn from his example. No, calm down. I remembered the look in Zenith's eyes when that family meeting of ours came to a close. Did I want someone to give me that look? One wife would be plenty, thanks.
I mean, you're a guy. You know how it is.
He was still refusing to back down. I knew what he meant, but that didn't mean I agreed with him. What would a 6-year-old boy know?
Well, take Sylphie. You're into her, aren't you? She's going to be gorgeous when she grows up.
Well, I sure couldn't disagree with him there. I guess you're right, though I think she's pretty cute right now.
So then you do understand.
I guess. Yeah, Paul was trash, but we seem to be on the same level here. I might look like a child, but mentally, I was an unemployed bum over 40 years old. A classic example of trash, right there. When it came to video games, if nothing else, I was fond of girls and loved harems. Perhaps, on an intrinsic level, I was the same sort of womanizer that Paul was. Maybe the incident where I'd yanked Sylphie's underwear off was where we'd started to see eye to eye. Ever since then, I'd felt like Paul was more willing to compromise, to open up with me. Maybe seeing my weak points had made him lose that drive to be an unreasonably strict father. He was still growing, too. I looked to see Paul grinning and chuckling. His gaze wasn't directed at me, but rather behind me. I turned around and saw Sylphie standing there. It was rare of her to come to our house. On closer inspection, she was blushing ever so slightly, her hands fidgeting. She must have overheard me.
Go on, repeat what you just said for her.
I let out a tiny snort. I didn't understand this guy at all. Guess Paul still had a ways to go. Even heartfelt words eventually lost their impact if you heard them so often you got used to them. Repeating those words now was a no-go, so I just flashed Sylphie a wordless grin and offered her a wave instead. Besides, Sylphie was only 6 years old. It was a decade too early for that sort of conversation. If I kept reassuring her over and over that she was cute at this tender age, she'd grow up all conceited and entitled. My older sister from my past life was a prime example of that.
I think you're cool too, Rudy.
Oh, yeah? Thanks, Sylphie. I grinned wide, hoping that my white teeth might shine with a dazzling gleam, though, of course, they didn't. Sylphie was excellent at being diplomatic. I nearly mistook that look in her upturned eyes for sincerity. I'd certainly meant it when I'd said she was cute, but there were no romantic feelings behind that. Not right now, anyway.
All right, Father. We're going to head out.
Don't go rolling around in the hay out there, okay?
Oh, come on. As if I would. This is me we're talking about, not you. Mother, father is...
No. Stop.
And so, today our house would be a peaceful one yet again. Soon after that, Zenith gave birth. It was a rough experience, a breech birth. With Lilia gravid as she was, she called for a midwife from the village, an older woman, but even she said the situation was hopeless. That's how bad it was. The birth took quite some time with both mother and child at risk. Lilia put all of her combined knowledge to work, and I assisted by continually casting healing spells, even though I wasn't great at them. All told, our efforts worked, and the birth was a success. The baby came safely into this world, letting out its first healthy cries. It was a girl. I had a little sister. I was glad it wasn't a little brother. Our relief was short-lived, however, as Lilia went into labor as well. We were all already exhausted, our guards down. The words premature birth flittered through my mind. This time, however, the midwife was able to play her part. While she might not have been good with breech births, premature births were something she claimed to have experience in. Age really did bring wisdom sometimes. I did as the midwife instructed, kicking Paul in the butt to snap him out of his daze and have him bring Lilia to my room. While he was taking care of that, I used magic to prepare a new bath for the soon-to-be newborn, gathered up all the clean cloths and towels we had, and went back to the midwife. I let her handle things from there. The moment the baby was born, Lilia boldly cried out Paul's name. He was at her side, dripping with sweetness, clutching her hand. The baby was smaller than Zenith's, but let out the same kind of healthy cries all the same. This one was a girl as well, 2 daughters, 2 little sisters. Paul chuckled sheepishly to himself, even as he mused about both of his new children being girls. For the second time that day, I got to see the big dumb grin of a new parent on his face.
Paul was in an unenviable position, however. The women in our household had now doubled in number.
Who was going to wind up on the bottom of the totem pole in that situation? Probably the guy who cheated with the maid and knocked her up. As for me, I was hoping to establish myself as the cool older brother. No way was Paul getting any respect. Zenith's daughter was named Norn. Lilia's daughter was named Aisha. Chapter 10, Stunted Growth. I was now 7 years old. My 2 little sisters, Norn and Aisha, were growing quickly. They cried when they peed themselves. They cried when they pooped themselves. They cried when they were upset about something. And they cried even when they weren't. They'd cry in the middle of the night, and they'd cry first thing in the morning, and when afternoon rolled around, there'd be some particularly energetic wailing. Before long, Paul and Zenith were having a shared nervous breakdown. The only one who kept her cool was Lilia.
See?
Now this is what child rearing is. Things with young Rudeus were much too easy. You could hardly call that real child rearing.
In my case, I was already used to crying babies, thanks to my younger brother from my last life, so it didn't bother me much. And, not to brag, but I had experience in looking after babies again, thanks to my brother, so I'd briskly change diapers and help out with the laundry and the cleaning. Paul would watch me, looking quite embarrassed for himself. Much like a Japanese man born before World War II, he didn't know how to do anything around the house. Certainly, his skills with the sword were undeniable, and the people of the town held him in esteem, but he was only half the man he needed to be in order to be a dad, and this was his second time around too. Good grief. To help restore some of Paul's honor here, let me talk some about his more amazing points. Now, I admit that he was a man with plenty of flaws, and was, in fact, undeniably human garbage. So why do this? Because he was strong. These were his skills: sword god style, advanced; water god style, advanced; north god style, advanced. Yeah, advanced in all three schools. To put that into perspective, they said that it took a talented individual a good 10 years of dedication to reach the advanced level in a given school. To put it in kendo terms, it was somewhere around 4th or 5th dan. Intermediate level was somewhere around 1st through 3rd dan, and was the rank at which someone was considered a full-fledged knight. To reach saint level required the skill of someone the equivalent of 6th dan or higher, but that's irrelevant here. Essentially, Paul possessed skills equivalent to someone who'd reached 4th dan in kendo, judo, and karate, and he'd given up on all of those before finishing his training. He made a poor excuse for an adult, but in terms of strength, the man was a certifiable badass. Moreover, for someone only in his mid-20s, he had an almost scary amount of real-world combat experience. That experience had made him both cunning and pragmatic. It was an intuitive thing, so I barely made sense of half of it, but I could tell that he was the real deal. In my 2 years of training under Paul, I hadn't even broken out of the beginner level. Maybe that might change after my physique developed more in a few years, but for now, no matter what mental simulations I ran, I couldn't see myself defeating him. Even if I made full use of my spell catalog and tried every dirty trick I could, victory didn't feel within my grasp at all. I had seen Paul do battle with monsters before. Actually, it was more accurate to say he showed me. He'd gotten some reports that monsters had turned up, and so he dragged me along so I could watch from a distance, saying that seeing a battle would be a good experience for me. And I'll be honest, here, it was pretty damn amazing. Paul was up against 4 monsters. 3 of them were what we called assault dogs, canine monsters that moved about like trained Dobermans. The 4th was a bipedal, 4-armed porcine monstrosity known as a Terminator boar. The boar had emerged from within the forest with the 3 dogs in formation behind him. Paul handled them with ease, beheading the lot of them in a single stroke. I'll say it again. It was pretty damn amazing. His fighting style had a certain beauty to it, a mysterious rhythm that made your heart race, yet put you at ease while watching. I had no good way to explain it, but if I had to boil it down to one word, I'd say it was charisma. Paul's fighting style had charisma. It earned absolute trust from the men in his command, won Zenith's heart and Lilia's lust, and even stoked the passions of Mrs. Jit, Adto. He was the most desirable guy in the whole entire village. Charisma aside, I was grateful to have Paul around, to have someone more powerful than me so close by. If he hadn't been around, I might have grown up to be an arrogant punk. I would have let my skill in magic convince me to challenge some monsters to a fight, and unable to handle a pack of assault dogs, I'd have wound up getting torn to literal pieces, and if the monsters didn't do it, people would have. If I'd let my skills go to my head, I'd definitely have picked a fight with someone I couldn't beat. It was a common story, and I'd have deserved whatever came to me, too. Swordsmen in this world had skills beyond what I was used to. They could run at speeds approaching 50 kilometers per hour, and their reflexes and ability to track movement were quite impressive. Thanks to the existence of healing magic, death from injury was something that could be staved off, so these swordsmen were practiced in killing their foes in a single stroke. In a world where monsters existed, it only made sense for people to grow so powerful. Still, even Paul was only at the advanced level. There were plenty of people higher up the rankings within the official framework alone. And there were enough world-famous individuals and monsters out there that Paul couldn't hope to defeat even if he had backup. There's always a bigger fish, after all. I was grateful for Paul teaching me to wield a sword. Other than that, though, he was still no good as a dad. He was like an Olympic gold medalist who also happened to be a convicted criminal. One day, I was working on my sword practice with Paul, as I usually did. Once again, I could tell I wasn't going to beat him that day. I probably wouldn't beat him the day after, either. Lately, I hadn't felt the sense that I was improving at all. Still, if I didn't keep trying, I definitely wasn't going to get better. Besides, even if I wasn't feeling that sense of improvement, my body was still internalizing the practice. Probably. I mean, it had to be, right? As I was mulling that over, Paul broke the silence.
By the way, Rudy, about school... No, you probably don't need that. Never mind. Let's get back to it.
He quickly broke off and brought his practice sword to bear, as if nothing had happened. I wasn't going to let that slide. What do you mean, school?
There's an educational institution in Roa, the capital of Fatoa, where they teach things like reading and writing, arithmetic, history, etiquette, and that sort of thing.
I've heard of it.
Normally, you'd start going there around your age, but you probably don't need to. You already know how to read and write and do sums, right?
Well, yeah. I let everyone think that Roxy had taught me arithmetic. With 2 new baby girls, the financial situation at home had gotten rather tough, and with Zenith constantly poring over our accounts ledger, I decided to help her out to her great shock. It had looked like there was going to be another uproar over what a genius I was, so I blurted out Roxy's name to fend that off. And hey, if that made their estimation of Roxy go up as a result, all the better. I'm interested in school, though. There'd be a lot of other children around my age there, right? Maybe I could make some friends. Paul swallowed, as if he had a lump in his throat.
I mean, it's not all that great a place. Etiquette is just stuffy nonsense. Knowing history doesn't help with anything, and you're definitely going to get bullied. A bunch of local noble brats will be there, sure, but they just get all bitchy whenever they're not number one. With a kid like you there, they'll probably form a clique and push you around. My father was a marquis, so with you being of even lower standing than I was, you'll be seen as even more of an upstart.
Paul's rundown sounded like it was coming from personal experience. He'd run away from home because he was disgusted by his rigid father and the corrupt nobility. Etiquette and history were an inescapable part of being a proper Asuran noble, so he must have found those subjects tough to tolerate. An unmistakable tension filled the air between us as we talked. Really? I would have figured that noble women had some pretty cute daughters.
Let me stop you right there. Noble daughters cake their faces thick with makeup, fuss obsessively over their hairdos, and reek of perfume. I mean, sure, some of them practice swordplay and are hot, but the bulk of them keep their bodies hidden underneath corsets. And even when you do get one into bed and get her clothes off, they never get any exercise, so the bodies are all loose and flabby to boot. Your dad's been tricked many times on that front.
Paul had a distant look in his eyes as he spoke. What a heap of rubbish. Then again, he'd had those experiences, and then wound up with a lovely wife like Zenith, so maybe there was something to it. Maybe I won't go to school then. There was still a lot of stuff I wanted to teach Sylphie, for starters, and I'd have to be crazy to go someplace where I knew for sure I'd be bullied. I hadn't been a shut-in for close to 20 years, just for show.
Good call. If you ever feel like schooling, you can just become an adventurer and go delving in some labyrinths.
An adventurer?
Yeah, hitting up labyrinths is great. The ladies there don't wear makeup, so you can tell at a glance who's pretty and who's not, and whether they're swordswomen or soldiers or wizards, they're all in great shape.
Okay, setting the garbage bits of all that aside, based on what I'd read, labyrinths were a kind of monster themselves. They started as simple caverns, but were altered by accumulations of magical energy, transforming them into labyrinths. At the deepest part of the labyrinth was a magical crystal you could think of as the power source, which was protected by a boss that acted as the guardian. This magical crystal was bait, exuding a powerful, attractive energy. Monsters were drawn in by that energy and made their way into the labyrinth, where they fell victim to traps, starved to death, or were killed by the boss that guarded the crystal. The labyrinth then absorbed the magical essence of those dead monsters. However, newly formed labyrinths often had their magical crystals devoured by monsters instead, or the crystal was shattered by the cavern collapsing. Hearing that some of them met clumsy ends made them seem all the more like living creatures. But monsters weren't the only thing drawn in by these magical crystals. Humans found them quite tempting as well. The crystals could be used as catalysts for certain spells, and they fetched a rather high price. The price went up with size, but even a small one would bring in enough to afford someone a full year of easy living. And while these magical crystals were the only treasures the monsters cared about, that wasn't the case for humans. As time passed, the equipment that belonged to the monsters and adventurers that the labyrinth had devoured would grow imbued with magical energy. They became a new sort of bait, magical items. Magical items differed from magical implements in that they could be used without drawing upon the wielder's own magical energy. Most magical items, however, didn't come with useful abilities. The majority of them had powers that were garbage. Still, there was a chance that you might find one among them that gave the user the abilities of someone who was a saint-tier magician. Items like this sold for a fortune, and people delved into labyrinths with dreams of striking it rich quick. The bulk of them fell before they could reach their prize, however. Their deaths, feeding the labyrinth as it took their magical essence and used it to grow larger and deeper. This was how long-standing labyrinths came to have their depths filled with hoards of treasure. The oldest and deepest known labyrinth was the Pit of the Dragon God, situated at the foot of the holy Mount Dragoncry in the Redworm mountain range. From what I'd read, it had been around for at least 10,000 years and was estimated to contain some 2,500 floors. Apparently, this colossal dungeon was connected to a hole at the pinnacle of Mount Dragoncry itself. By leaping into it, you could presumably plunge right to the very deepest floor, but no one who tried that stunt ever made it back alive. That hole wasn't a volcanic crater or anything, by the way. The labyrinth itself had supposedly created it in order to consume red dragons. When one flew by, the pit would suck it into its maw. There wasn't much proof to support that particular myth, but it wouldn't have been too surprising given that the pit was a truly ancient monster. As for the most purely challenging labyrinths, you had the aptly named Hell, located on the Divine Continent, and Devil's Cave, which sat in the middle of the Ringus Sea. Both of these were brutally difficult even to reach, meaning it was all but impossible to resupply once you arrived. Given their great depth and the fact that you couldn't really take your time exploring them, they'd earned a reputation as the toughest tests an adventurer could face. That was basically the extent of my knowledge on this topic at the moment. I've read a bit about labyrinths.
Ah, the Three Swordsmen and the Labyrinth, right? Exploring a legendary dungeon like that's a sure way to get your name into the history books. Ever thought about giving it a shot yourself?
The Three Swordsmen and the Labyrinth was the tale of three brilliant young fighters who had come to be known as the Sword God, the Water God, and the North God. The book began with their initial meeting and followed them through a series of twists and turns that led them to challenge a huge labyrinth together. There was plenty of conflict, laughter, and male bonding along the way, as well as a few painful farewells. In the end, naturally, they achieved their goal triumphantly. The labyrinth in that book only went down about 100 floors, but it was bad enough. Isn't that just a story, though?
Nope. They say the three great styles we've passed down through the generations were born inside that labyrinth.
Really? But those guys became divine-class swordsmen, and they had all sorts of trouble. I don't think I'd last 5 minutes in that place.
Hey, I used to poke around in labyrinths all the time, okay? You'd be fine.
Paul rolled right into the story of a young Oni man who teamed up with a group of human warriors to enter a labyrinth full of fishmen, and their eventual victory at the cost of several comrades. Before I had time to process that one, he moved on to the tale of an incompetent magician who accidentally fell into a labyrinth, joined a party that happened to have lost its own magician, and discovered his latent talents in the heat of battle. It kind of felt like Paul had been rehearsing this conversation in advance. Come to think of it, he wanted me to be a swordsman, didn't he? I guess the plan was to barrage me with stories of adventure and fill my head with dreams of labyrinths and dramatic battles. I wouldn't say I was uninterested, especially when it came to the labyrinths themselves. But on the whole, it sounded way too dangerous. The people in that book tended to meet their ends pretty damn abruptly, for one thing. The three swordsmen weren't the only characters, of course, but they were the only ones who survived their expedition. One of their allies got charred to a crisp in the middle of a conversation by a fireball that came flying out of nowhere. Another one fell through a hole in the floor and went splat. Oh, and then there was that guy who got chopped in half the moment he poked his head out of cover. Even warriors strong enough to take down fearsome monsters easily were slaughtered by traps the instant they got a little careless. Being the protagonists and all, our three heroes made their way past these obstacles unscathed, but I doubted a clumsy guy like me could manage that. I was the oblivious type, after all.
What do you think? Adventuring might be pretty fun too, right?
Come on. You can't be serious. Why would I deliberately put myself in highly risky situations just to get a thrill? A relaxed life full of women just like Paul's seemed way more appealing. I think I'm more inclined to spend my life chasing skirts.
Oh, I guess you really are my son.
Ideally, I'd like to build myself a little harem, just like my dear old dad.
No kidding. Think you'd better stick to chasing one skirt at a time for now, though.
Paul pointed behind me with a grin. I turned around to find myself face to face with a very sulky-looking Sylphie. Perfect timing, moron. I've been spending a lot of time in my room with Sylphie recently, walking her through the basics of math and science. It seemed like the quickest way to help her understand how silent spellcasting really worked in detail. Unfortunately, I'd left school after junior high in my previous life. While I'd technically gotten into some high school for morons, I dropped out almost immediately. As a result, there was a real limit to how much I could teach her. Book learning wasn't everything, sure, but I was starting to get angry at myself for not having taken my studies a bit more seriously. By now, Sylphie had mastered the basics of reading and writing, and could handle multiplying two-digit numbers. The times table had been something of a struggle, but the girl clearly wasn't dumb. She'd probably pick up division soon enough as well. I was also teaching her some fundamental science, in parallel with magic.
Why does water turn into, vapor when you heat it up?
Well, water naturally dissolves into air, but it takes some heat for that to happen. So the hotter it gets, the more easily it dissolves. Today, we were covering the cycle of evaporation, condensation, and precipitation. From the look on Sylphie's face, it was clear she didn't really understand what I was saying. Still, she'd proven herself a quick learner in general, probably because she always paid attention and tried her best. Basically, anything melts if you get it hot enough, okay? And if it gets colder again, it turns back into a solid. I wasn't a teacher or anything, so this was the best I could manage. Sylphie was cleverer than me anyway. She'd probably try a few things out herself until it all made sense to her. Thanks to magic, you didn't really need tools to experiment with stuff like this.
Anything can melt? Even stuff like rocks?
Yep, you'd need some really intense heat though.
Could you melt one, Rudy?
Of course! Not that I'd ever tried. Still, when I really focused, I could now roughly distinguish between the different elements in the air around me. I could probably just pump oxygen and hydrogen into a rock until it melted. Incidentally, there was also a spell called Magma Gusher that lets you create a spontaneous burst of lava. I felt like that one had to be some combination of earth and fire magic, but it was classed as an advanced level fire spell. They like to divide things neatly into their different disciplines here, but it was all interrelated, and pumping more raw magical power into your spells wasn't the only way to make them stronger. By manipulating combustible gases, for example, you could produce intense heat more efficiently. I'd figured all that out by now, but not much else. My skill as a magician hadn't really improved since Roxy left. I'd just been finding ways to combine my current spells, use them more effectively, and increase their power with some minor scientific tweaks. At a glance, it probably looked like I was growing stronger, but it felt more like I'd hit a dead end. Given my current level of knowledge, I might never manage to do anything more challenging than what I could pull off now. Back in my former life, it was easy enough to find information on the internet when I needed it, but there wasn't anything so convenient in this world. Maybe I really did need someone to teach me. School. Roxy had mentioned that schools for magicians tended to have very strict rules and standards, but maybe I could find some way to get into one.
Are you going to a school, Rudy?
Apparently, I'd been thinking out loud. Sophie turned to look at me, an anxious expression on her face. The movement left her emerald green hair swaying slightly. She'd been growing it out a little lately, probably because I'd kept dropping casual suggestions once a month or so. At the moment, it only qualified as a short bob, but it was kind of nice to see her messy little curls react to every movement of her head. We'd be in ponytail territory in no time. No, I'm not planning on it. Father says I'd be bullied so mercilessly that I wouldn't learn a thing.
But you've been acting kind of strange again.
Wait, seriously? That was news to me. Had I screwed up again? I've been trying so hard to keep up the totally oblivious act around her, too. I've been strange ever since I was a baby, according to my parents. I was trying to probe for details with a little joke, but Sylphie frowned and shook her head.
That's not what I meant. You seem kind of sad lately.
Huh. I was worried she'd gotten a glimpse of my true nature somehow, but apparently she was just concerned about me. Well, I haven't made that much progress lately, you know? I'm not getting any better with magic or the sword.
But you're already amazing, Rudy.
For my age, maybe. True, there probably weren't that many children in this world on my level. But that said, I hadn't yet accomplished much of anything. My skill with magic came partially from my memories of my previous life, and partially from my initial breakthrough with the silent spellcasting. Those two factors had given me a leg up over most people, but now that I'd hit this wall, I couldn't find a way past it. The fact that I could remember 34 mostly wasted years wasn't that much help anymore. It was easy to curse myself for not having studied when I had the chance. But what was done, and facts from my former world wouldn't necessarily apply to this one anyway. This place had its own set of rules I needed to discover. I couldn't just lean on my old memories forever. Magic was the fundamental law here, and to understand it, I needed to understand this world. Still, I feel like it's about time I took my next step forward, you know? Sophie was improving steadily at magic and getting smarter by the day. Watching her progress was starting to make me feel a little pathetic. I was just treading water by comparison. For the moment, I could still think of myself as the oblivious protagonist of this story. But unless I got my arrogant butt in gear, this girl was going to leave me in the dust someday.
Are you gonna go somewhere?
Well, maybe. Father did say I should give exploring labyrinths a shot, and there isn't that much I can do in this village. I'll probably end up going to some school or trying the adventurer thing, I guess.
I'd spoken casually, without giving it too much thought. But for some reason... Sophie cried out and threw her arms around me. Oh ho! What's this? Time for a confession scene? But even as the thought was running through my mind, I realized she was trembling.
Miss Sophiette?
No, no, no.
The girl was squeezing me so hard it was difficult to breathe. Not sure how to respond. I fell silent for a moment.
Don't. Rudy!
Apparently interpreting this negatively, Sophie burst into tears, little shoulders shuddering. She proceeded to bury her face in my chest. Huh? Seriously? What's going on here? For the moment, the girl clearly needed comforting, so I stroked her head and rubbed her back. I wrapped my arms around Sophie. When I buried my face in her hair, I discovered that it smelled extremely nice. Oh man, pure bliss. Can I just keep her, please?
Hick, please, Rudy. Don't go away.
Whoops, snap out of it, stupid. Okay. It made perfect sense, really. For a while now, Sophie had been coming over to our house first thing in the morning almost every day. She would happily watch me practice my swordplay, after which we moved on to magic and her studies. If I suddenly left, Sophie's whole daily routine would disappear, and she'd go right back to being a loner. She could fend off bullies with her magic now, but it wasn't like she'd made any other friends. The more I thought about it, the more affection I felt for her. I was the only one Sophie cared about this deeply. She was mine, and mine alone. I get the message, okay? I won't go anywhere. How could I even think of tossing a sweet little girl like this aside and wandering off somewhere? To do what? Improve my magic? To hell with that. I could already cast advanced and Saint Tier spells. That was good enough to make a living as a tutor, the way Roxy did. So why couldn't I just stay here with Sophie until we were old enough to get by on our own? Sounded pretty good to me. We'd grow up together, and she'd grow up into my perfect woman. Hikaru Genji style, baby. Guehe. No. Bad thoughts. What happened to the whole oblivious thing, buddy? You're getting way too far ahead of yourself. Well, that said, there's nothing in the rulebook that says an oblivious protagonist can't brainwash their childhood friend, right? Gah, what am I thinking? But, ugh. The girl was only 6 years old. She was clearly very fond of me, but she wasn't capable of feeling romantic love yet. So, yeah, let's put all that on hold. For how long, though? Now that was the question. Did I need to wait until she turned 10? 15? Even older? What if she ended up hating me for wasting her time? Her affection meter was at max for now, but there was no guarantee it would stay that way forever. Could I live with myself if it dropped to 0? No. Hell no. I'm a man who knows my limits, damn it. Seriously, she's so soft and warm and fluffy. And she smells so freaking good. She's bearing her soul to me right now, and I'm supposed to just sit here slack-jawed? That's so messed up. We both know how we feel, so we should just take this to the next level. Why force myself to waste precious time? Why not just admit I made the wrong call? That does it. I've decided. I'll make her into my perfect girl. I'm oblivious no more, Sophie.
Hey, Rudy. Letter for you.
At this point, Paul barged into the room, pulling me out of my own little world, and not a moment too soon. Startled, I pulled away from Sylphie. My dear father probably deserved some gratitude for that one. I'd been about 2 minutes away from turning into an extremely pathetic kind of villain. Still, a man's endurance had its limits. I'd managed to weather this storm, but there was no telling what might happen next time. The letter I received that day was from Roxy, as it happened. Dear Rudeus, how have you been? It's hard to believe, but I suppose 2 years have flown by since we parted. Things have finally settled down a bit on my end, so I thought I'd take the chance to write. At the moment, I'm staying in the royal capital of the Kingdom of Sharon. In the course of exploring various labyrinths, it seems I've made something of a name for myself, so I ended up getting hired to tutor a certain prince. Teaching him brings back memories of the time I spent in the Greyrat household. For one thing, the prince is actually quite a bit like the young man I tutored there. While not quite as talented as you, he's a quick-witted boy and a budding young magician in his own right. Regrettably, he's also prone to stealing my underwear and peeping on me when I'm changing, just like someone else I could name. His personality's a bit on the pompous side, and he's considerably more energetic, but on the whole your patterns of behavior are quite similar. Perhaps ambitious men are all sex-crazed animals at heart. I'm a bit worried he'll assault me before I'm finished teaching him. Can't say I understand what you people find so appealing about my scrawny little body, honestly. Maybe I shouldn't be writing this. If anyone were to read it, they might toss me in the dungeon for besmirching the honor of the royal family. I'll just have to cross that bridge when I come to it. It's not like I mean any of this in a bad way, really. In any case, it seems the royal court is planning to appoint me as a court magician for the duration of my stay. There's still a great deal of magical research I'm itching to pursue, so that should work out quite nicely. Oh, that reminds me, I finally managed to get the hang of casting king-tier water spells. The Royal Library here happened to have some helpful books on the subject. Back when I first mastered Saint-tier magic, I thought that was the best I could ever do, but it seems a bit of good old-fashioned effort goes a long way. I wouldn't be surprised if you're already casting Imperial-tier water spells by now, Rudeus. Or maybe you broadened your horizons and reached the Saint-tier in a different discipline. I know how voracious your thirst for knowledge is, so I could certainly see you dabbling in healing or summoning as well. Then again, maybe you chose to focus on your swordplay instead. I'd be a bit disappointed, to be honest, but I'm positive you'd make your mark on the world either way. Personally, I'm aiming to become a Water Saint-tier magician. Like I mentioned before, if you ever find yourself hitting a dead end in your magical studies, go get yourself admitted to the Renoa University of Magic. Without a letter of recommendation, you'll need to pass an entrance exam. But I don't think that should pose you any difficulty at all. Well then, until we meet again, Roxy. P.S. It's quite possible I will have left the royal court by the time your reply reaches it, so don't feel obliged to respond. Well, damn. Talk about a wake-up call. It took a moment for me to find the kingdom of Sharon on the map. It was a small country in the southeastern part of the central continent. Not so far away from here as the crow flies, but the mountain range in between was infested with red dragons, making it totally impassable. You'd have to take the long way around and approach it from the south. For all intents and purposes, Sharon was a far-off land. And as for Renoa, home to that University of Magic, you'd need to take a big loop around to the northwest to get there. At least now I knew why Roxy had never told me anything about magic above the king tier. She didn't know any better spells herself at the time. I decided to write a brief, vague reply to the letter. No need to explain the sad truth about my current situation. The girl seemed to have a mental image of me as some sort of genius, and I didn't want to disappoint her. Anyway, the Renoa University of Magic, huh? Roxy always made it sound like an amazing place. But it wasn't exactly close to home, and I couldn't just abandon Sylphie here. What to do? For the moment, I finished my letter, paused, then added a brief note. P.S. Sorry about stealing your panties. The next day, I waited until my family was gathered at the dinner table, and then made my move. Father, can I make a selfish request?
Hell no.
only to be shot down instantly. Fortunately, Paul's response earned him a good hard smack to the head from Zenith, who was seated at his side, and a follow-up attack from Lilia, who was seated on his other side. Ever since that whole mess with the unexpected pregnancy, Lilia had been joining us at the dinner table instead of waiting on us like a maid. It seemed like she was officially part of the family now. Was polygamy even a thing in this country? Oh, well. Not my problem.
You just tell your father what you want, Rudy. He'll make it happen.
The young masters never asked for much. This is a golden opportunity to demonstrate some paternal dignity, Master Paul.
After resettling himself in his seat, Paul folded his arms and stuck out his chin imperiously.
Look, the kid wants something so crazy that he asked permission just to bring it up. Whatever it is, it's probably impossible.
This comment earned him another 2 smacks that knocked him right back down to the table. Just our usual family slapstick routine. All right, let's get straight to the point. The thing is, I've recently hit a dead end in my magical studies, and for that reason, I was hoping to attend the Renoa University of Magic.
Oh?
But when I mentioned this to Sylphie, she broke down in tears and begged me not to leave her.
What a little lady killer. Wonder who you got that from.
Another 2 smacks followed that one naturally. The ideal solution would be for the 2 of us to go together, but Sylphie's family isn't as well off as ours. I wanted to ask if you'd consider paying for both of us to attend.
You don't say?
Leaning his elbows on the table, Paul shot me a sharp look that brought to mind a certain spectacled commander. His eyes were deadly serious, the same way they got when he picked up a sword.
Well, the answer's no.
Once again, he'd shot me down. But this time it wasn't just a joke, and Zenith and Lilia stayed silent.
I've got 3 reasons. First, you're still in the middle of your training with the sword. If you drop it now, you'll end up a permanent amateur with no hope of improving. As your teacher, I can't allow that. Second, the money is an issue. We could probably manage your tuition, but not Sylphie's too. Magic schools aren't cheap, and it's not like we have a magical money tree ourselves. Third, you're only 7 years old. You're a clever kid, but there's still plenty you don't know, and you're seriously lacking in real-world experience. It would just be irresponsible for me to cut you loose right now.
Paul's refusal didn't surprise me in the least. I wasn't about to give up, though. Unlike before, he was grounding his denial in 3 rational, well-defined objections. That meant that if I addressed those points, I could gain his permission. There was no need to rush. I never expected any of this to happen tomorrow anyway. I understand, Father. I'll continue training with you in the sword, of course. But can I ask how old you think I need to be before this could happen?
Let's see, 15? Let's say 12. Stick around that long, at least.
12? 15 was the age kids came of age in this country, as I recalled. Can I ask why you chose 12 specifically?
That's the age I was when I left home myself.
All right. This didn't seem like something Paul would be willing to compromise on. No point arguing about it and getting his hackles up. Well then, one last thing.
Sure.
Can you help me find a job? I can read, write, and do arithmetic, so I might make a decent tutor. I wouldn't mind working as a magician either. I'd take whatever pays best.
You want a job? Why?
I want to earn Sylphie's tuition for her.
I don't think it's in her best interest for you to do that.
Maybe not. I think it's in my best interest, though. The room felt completely silent for a long moment. I had to fight the urge to squirm awkwardly in my seat.
I see. So that's how it is, huh?
In the end, Paul nodded to himself, apparently convinced of something.
All right, fine. In that case, I'll look into a few things for you.
While Zenith and Leela's faces now expressed open concern, the look in Paul's eyes told me that I could take him at his word. Thank you very much. I lowered my head in gratitude as my family resumed their meal.
Well, I can't say I was expecting that. I knew my boy was growing up quickly, but most kids don't start talking like that until they're 14 or 15 at the earliest. Even I didn't hit this stage until I turned 11 when I reached advanced level in the sword god style. and some people never get to it at all. What was that phrase again? Don't rush through your life too fast or it'll end before you know it. A certain warrior had told me that a long time ago. I just rolled my eyes back then. The way I saw it, everyone else was taking things too damn slowly. Any given human has a limited window of time in which they can actually accomplish things, but nobody seemed to feel any sense of urgency at all. I wanted to do everything I possibly could while I had the chance. And if someone wanted to criticize me after the fact, well, I'd cross that bridge when I came to it. Of course, thanks to doing everything I could, I'd eventually found myself with a pregnant wife on my hands, ended up quitting the adventuring business and leaning on my high-status relatives' connections to get myself a steady job as a knight. Forget that part for now, though. Point is, Rudeus was taking things at a much quicker pace than I ever did. The kid was sprinting forward so fast that it made me a little nervous just to watch him go. I'm sure the adults around me had similar thoughts when I was young. There was one major difference, though. Rudeus was actually planning things in advance instead of randomly failing about the way I used to. I have to assume he got that side of his personality from Zenith. Still, I think I need to keep him in one place a little longer. With that thought in mind, I began to write a letter. Just like Laws had been telling me the other day, Sylphie had clearly gotten quite attached to Rudeus. From her perspective, he was both the knight in shining armor who'd saved her from the misery of her early childhood and the all-knowing big brother who could answer all her questions. She obviously admired him. Recently, she seemed to be developing a crush on him as well. Laws, for his part, told me he was hoping the two of them might end up getting hitched someday. At the time, I was pretty pleased at the prospect of adding such a cute daughter to the family, but after hearing what Rudeus had said today, I had to reconsider. Right now, the girl was basically putty in his hands. If the two of them continued to grow up together like this, Sylphie was going to be permanently dependent on Rudeus, even as an adult. I'd seen a few cases like that back when I was still nobility. I'd seen human beings who were little more than puppets, totally controlled by their parents. That life's not so bad while the guy who pulls your strings is still around, I guess. As long as Rudeus kept loving Sylphie, she'd probably be just fine. But unfortunately, the kid had a bit of his dad in him as well. He was a born womanizer, in other words. There was a chance he might go running off after every other girl who caught his eye. A chance? The boy was my son. He was definitely going to mess around. And when the dust settled, he might not end up choosing Sylphie. She'd never recover from that blow. Never. My son might very well end up entirely ruining that sweet little kid's life. I couldn't allow that to happen. It sure as hell wouldn't be in his best interests either. And so, I wrote my letter. Hopefully I'd get the response I was looking for. That said, how was I going to convince that smooth-talking kid to go along with this? Maybe this called for a brute force approach.
Chapter 11. Parted. One morning, maybe a month after I told Paul that I wanted to start working, a letter addressed to him arrived at our home. It was probably the reply that I'd been waiting for.
I tried my best to brace myself for the news without getting too impatient. Would he tell me after training? At lunch? Maybe dinner? For the moment, I decided to focus on our sword practice.
As it happened, though, he chose to bring it up before we'd even finished training.
Yes, Father. What is it?
Trying to keep my face composed, I waited eagerly for Paul's next words. This was going to be my first job ever, in either life. I had to nail this. But instead of giving me the good news I was expecting, Paul took things in a strange direction.
Tell me something. What would you do if I said you had to stop seeing Sylphie for a while?
What? I'd object, obviously.
Right. Figures.
What's this about?
Forget it. No point talking this over. You just twisted all around on me, I'm sure.
The instant these words left Paul's mouth, his expression changed dramatically. All of a sudden, there was murder in his eyes. Even an amateur like me could sense what was coming next. Wah! In one smooth, intimidating motion, my father leapt forward, Death was rushing straight at me, cold and silent. Acting on pure instinct, I responded with all the power at my disposal, using fire and wind magic simultaneously to create a blast between us. I jumped backwards just as the wave of hot wind struck me, letting the impact carry me farther. As it happened, I'd played out this scenario in my mind more than once. In a fight against Paul, I had no chance unless I put some distance between us at the start. The blast would hurt me as much as him, but as long as I took the damage without flinching, it would buy me a bit of space. Only a bit, of course. My totally unscathed father was still running forward, his body low to the ground. Didn't do a damn thing to him. I hadn't expected anything else, but it was still terrifying. I needed to make my next move, and fast. Just backing up wouldn't work. The guy running forward would always be faster. Acting on a reflexive judgment call, I set off a shockwave right next to myself. The blow hit me hard enough to send me flying to the side. In that same instant, I heard something slice through the air next to my ear, and my blood ran cold. Paul's sword had slashed through the space where my head had been a split second earlier. Well, that's good, I guess. I dodged the first attack. That was a very big deal. He was still close, but I'd put a little distance between us. I started seeing some possibility I might win this. As Paul turned toward me to press the attack, I cast a spell that turned the ground in front of him into a sinkhole. His leading foot stepped right into the trap. He instantly shifted his body's entire weight onto his other leg and freed himself, barely even missing a beat. Damn! Do I need to catch both his legs at once? This time, I transformed the ground around me into a thick, watery bog. Before I could sink into it, I fired a small jet of water at the ground in front of me, sending myself gliding backward across the surface. By the time I realized that I wasn't moving fast enough, it was too late. Paul reached the edge of my little swamp and took one great bound forward. The force of his stride actually left a small crater in the ground. The man was going to reach me in a single leap. I swung my sword in a blind panic, trying to intercept him. It was an ugly, careless attack, nothing like the strikes I'd learned. The grip of my sword wobbled unpleasantly in my hands as my blow was gently turned aside. I could tell Paul had used a water god-style defense. For all the good it did me. Once a water god swordsman deflects your blow, they always follow up with a counter-strike. I knew what was coming, but I couldn't do a thing about it. Paul's blade arced toward me for a moment that lasted an eternity. Well, I'm glad we're using wooden swords, at least. A short, sharp blow to my neck knocked me instantly unconscious. When I woke up, I found myself inside a box of some sort. Given all the swaying and clattering going on, it was presumably some kind of vehicle. I tried to sit up, only to discover that I couldn't move at all. Looking down, I realized I was tightly bound in quite a lot of rope. What the hell is going on here? I managed to turn my neck enough to look around, and saw there was a woman in there with me. She had dark brown skin, a muscular body covered in scars, and skimpy leather clothes that didn't leave much to the imagination. The strong features of her face, combined with the eye patch she was wearing, gave her a definite tough guy vibe. Pretty much the picture of a fearless female warrior from some fantasy show, especially given those big, furry ears and tiger-like tail. Apparently sensing my eyes on her, the woman glanced down at me. Nice to meet you. My name's Rudeus Greyrat. Pardon my manners, I can't seem to get up at the moment. A preemptive introduction felt like the right move. The most basic rule of conversation was to start talking first. Once you seized the initiative, you could control where things went from there.
For Paul's son, you're oddly polite.
I'm my mother's son as well, as it happens.
Guess you've got some zenith in you, too.
Apparently, she knew both of my parents. That was something of a relief.
The name's Ghislaine. We'll be getting very well acquainted starting tomorrow, kid.
Starting tomorrow? What? Well, okay. Nice to meet you, Ghislaine.
Yeah, same here.
At this point, I went ahead and burned away the ropes around me with a bit of fire magic. My body was sore as hell. That wasn't too surprising, since I hadn't been sleeping in the most comfortable of places. I stretched out my arms and legs and reveled in the blissful sense of release. Sure, I'd spent most of my previous life sitting in a cramped little room moving nothing but my fingers, but that didn't mean I wanted to spend so much time lying bound and helpless at the feet of some sadistic-looking older lady. Might have gotten a little uncomfortable after a while. There were benches to the front and rear of our little box, so I sat down across from Ghislaine. Windows to the left and right offered a view of the world outside. Nothing I saw outside looked remotely familiar. Okay, so this was definitely a vehicle. It was swaying so vigorously that I was a little worried I might get sick, and I could hear a sort of clopping coming from the direction we were moving in. Seemed reasonable to assume it was a horse-drawn carriage. Right, so I was taking a carriage ride with some macho lady, for reasons totally unclear to me. Gah! Have I been kidnapped by some wanton woman weightlifter? Did she steal the cutest boy in all the land to be her sex slave? Please, have mercy. I sorta dig girls with muscles, yes. But I've already pledged my heart to Sylphie. Well, if you must do it, be gentle with me, please? Wait. Bad thoughts. Calm down, dumbass. At times like these, a man's gotta stay cool. Count off prime numbers in your head until you relax. Remember what that one priest guy said. The primes are solitary numbers, divisible only by 1 and themselves. They give me strength. 3, 5, 11, 13, can't remember, damn it. Okay, screw the prime numbers. Just calm down, dude. Deep breaths, deep breaths. Ooh, breaths. Taboey. Now then, let's piece this together as best we can.
First of all, Paul had attacked me for no apparent reason and knocked me senseless. And when I'd woken up, I'd found myself inside a carriage, bound hand and foot.
Presumably, he KO'd me for some specific reason and then tossed me in here. The only other person in said carriage was a macho lady who said we'd be getting acquainted starting tomorrow. Come to think of it, Paul also said something strange right before he attacked me. Something like, "Stop seeing Sylphie," or maybe, "Sylphie's too good for the likes of you," or maybe, "Sylphie's mine now, kiddo, that scumbag pedo." Does his lust know no bounds? Wait, I think I just made up those last two. It was hard to think straight where Sylphie was concerned. I'd gotten completely derailed in no time at all. Damn it, this is all Paul's fault. Well, guess I'll just have to ask.
Miss?
You can call me Ghislaine.
Oh, okay. In that case, you could call me Ruru.
Sure thing, Ruru.
Right. So, the woman clearly didn't know a joke when she heard one. Miss Ghislaine, did my father tell you what's going on here?
Just Ghislaine, kid. No miss required.
As she spoke, Ghislaine reached into her jacket to retrieve a letter and handed it over to me. The front of it was completely blank.
That's for you, from Paul. Read it out loud, will you? I'm not so good with writing.
Okay. Opening up the sloppily folded piece of paper, I began to read. To my dear son, Rudeus, if you're reading this letter, it means that I'm no longer in this world.
What? What?
Ghislaine shouted, jumping to her feet. Good thing this carriage had a high ceiling. Please, sit down, Ghislaine. There's more.
Right.
Just like that, she sat right back down. Sorry, just kidding. I always wanted to try that one out on somebody. So, anyway, I knocked you down into the dirt, tied you up, and tossed you into a carriage like a bandit kidnapping a princess. I expect you're wondering what the hell is going on, hey? Ideally, that ball of muscle in there with you would just explain everything, but sadly, her brain mutated into an extra bicep some time ago, so I don't think that's going to work.
What was that?
Ghislaine shouted, jumping to her feet again.
Please, sit down, Ghislaine. The next part's nothing but compliments.
Right.
Right back down she went. Okay then, moving on.
That woman's a sword king. When it comes to the blade, you won't find a better teacher this side of the sword sanctum. Trust your old man on this one. She's really damn good. I never once got the upper hand on her, except in bed. Dad, please, could you not have just left that last part out? Ghislaine didn't exactly look displeased, though. The old man was certainly popular with the ladies. Anyway, I was evidently traveling with one hell of a fighter.
Now then, let's move on to your job. You're going to be tutoring a young lady in Roa, the biggest city in the Fitoa region. Teach her reading, writing, math, and some basic magic, all right? The girl's a spoiled, violent brat who was asked to leave her school, and she's already chased off a number of other tutors. But I've got faith in you, kiddo. I'm sure you'll manage somehow.
Wow. Very helpful, Paul. You
don't really look spoiled, Pelaine.
I'm not the young lady in question.
Right. Of course. Okay, let's keep moving. That lump of muscle with you works for the young lady's family as a bodyguard and swordsmanship instructor. In exchange for training you in the sword, she wants you to teach her reading, writing, and arithmetic as well. I know it's a ridiculous request coming from a woman with a bicep brain, but try not to laugh out loud. She's probably serious.
That son of a...
Was I seeing things, or was that a vein throbbing on Ghislaine's forehead? The main purpose of this letter was to explain the situation to me, but Paul's secondary goal was clearly to piss her off. Made me kind of curious about the nature of their relationship. She won't be a quick learner, I'm sure, but it's not such a bad deal. You won't have to pay for your lessons, at least. My lessons, huh? Right. I guess she was my new instructor from now on. Paul's swordsmanship was mostly instinct-based. Maybe he felt I needed a better teacher at this point. Or maybe he'd just gotten sick of watching me not improve at all. I think you could have stuck it out a little longer, man. How much would it usually cost to learn the sword from you, Ghislaine?
2 gold Azuron coins per month.
Say what? I was pretty sure that Roxy had earned 5 silver coins a month back when she was tutoring me. This lady charged about 4 times more. This was really a pretty solid deal then. A normal person in Asura could get by on about 2 silver coins a month. For the next 5 years, you'll be staying at the young lady's house to teach her. 5 whole years, you got that? You don't get to come back home until then, and no writing letters either. Sylphie's never going to learn how to stand on her own 2 feet if you keep hanging around the village, and you were growing increasingly reliant on her as well. That's why I made the call to separate the 2 of you. Wait, what? Hold on a second. What? Are you serious? I can't see Sylphie for 5 whole years. I can't even write her letters?
What's the matter, Ruru? Did you break up with your girlfriend?
No. My childish bully of a father broke us up by force. I hadn't even had a chance to say goodbye. Damn it, Paul! You'll pay for this!
Hang in there, Ruru. It'll be okay.
I think I'd rather you just called me Rudeus, actually.
All right then.
When I really thought about it, though, Paul had a point. At the rate things were going, Sylphie might have turned into a childhood friend character from a particularly shitty visual novel, you know? The kind who sticks to the protagonist constantly, revolving around him like a satellite and never develops a personality of her own. In the real world, a girl like that would make her own friends and learn about new things at school. But thanks to her hair, Sylphie was always going to have a tough time with that. There was a real chance she would have stayed glued to my side for years and years. I wouldn't really have minded, but the adults involved felt differently. This made sense. Paul had made the right call this time. As for your compensation, you'll be paid 2 silver Asuran coins a month. That's below the going rate for a live-in tutor, but it's more than enough for a child's allowance. When you have a little spare time, try to head out into the city and get a feel for spending money. A little practice is the best way to make sure you can use your cash effectively when you really need to. Then again, maybe that won't even be an issue for a kid as gifted as you. Just don't go buying any women, though. You got that? Seriously, man, you could just leave that part out. What was he trying some sort of reverse psychology here? Like, don't hit up any brothels, son. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Additionally, once you complete 5 years of consistent service and finish providing the young lady with a solid education in all respects, your contract entitles you to a special reward, a payment covering the cost of tuition for 2 people to the University of Magic. I see. In other words, once I did my time as a tutor, Paul was going to let me do what I wanted, just as he promised. Of course, there's no guarantee Sylphie will want to tag along with you 5 years from now, and you might lose interest in her yourself. But in any case, I'll make sure to explain the situation perfectly to her. Not sure I trust you on that one, Daddy dearest. I hope the years you spend in this new environment will teach you many things, allowing you to develop your talents even further. Sincerely, your noble, wise, and brilliant father, Paul. Brilliant, my ass! Your whole plan was just to beat me into submission. Still, I had to admit his overall line of thinking was pretty solid. This was for the best, for both Sylphie and me. She might go back to being a loner again, but unless she learned to face her own problems, she was never really going to grow as a person.
Paul really loves you, doesn't he?
I couldn't help smiling a little at that one. He used to be kind of distant, but he started really getting into the whole fatherhood thing.
Anyway, seems like he's pretty fond of you as well, Ghislaine.
Why do you say that?
I proceeded to read the letter's final line out loud. Feel free to make a move on the young lady as long as it's consensual.
Cast by Artale Studio, please subscribe to our channel if you enjoy listening.
Send that letter on to Zenith for me, will you?
Sounds like a plan. Just like that, I found myself traveling to the citadel of Roa, the largest settlement in the Fitoa region. I had some mixed feelings about that, of course, but it really was for the best. I couldn't just stay with Sylphie, so this was something that needed to happen. I definitely wasn't bitter about it at all. Nope. Man. I wish I could go see her once a year or so, at least. Well, maybe I'd manage to convince myself of that at some point. I just wasn't quite there yet. Paul.
Damn, that was close.
My son lay unconscious on the ground before my filthy mud-caked shoes.
Since this would be my last day teaching him the sword, I decided to put the fear of God in him before I knocked him out. But the kid actually snapped off a bunch of spells the instant I made my move. Wasn't just a bunch of panicked attacks, either. He was mainly trying to slow me down. And every single time he cast something, it was a different spell. That's my son for you, all right? Kid's got a knack for battle.
Sure, the fight had only lasted a few seconds, but it was a complete surprise attack, and I still needed 3 steps to take him down. That last one had been especially dangerous. If I'd hesitated even slightly, he would have snared both my legs and taken me out in no time.
3 steps was just too many when you're fighting a magician. If he'd been in a group, one of his allies would have stepped in to protect him by the time I'd taken my second stride. And if there'd been just a bit more distance between us, I might have needed 4 steps. For all intents and purposes, the kid got the best of me. You could probably toss him into a party of adventurers right now. He'd more than pull his own weight in a labyrinth. Guess you'd expect no less from the prodigy who gave a Water Saint tier magician an inferiority complex.
The boy was downright terrifying, but for some reason that made me happy. Up until now, I'd been jealous of anyone more talented than me, but where my son was concerned, all I felt was pride.
Okay, this isn't the time to be talking to myself. Let's get this done before Laws makes it over here.
I quickly proceeded to tie up my son. The carriage had arrived by the time I finished, so I picked him up and prepared to toss him into it. Of course, Laws picked that moment to show up with Sylphie in tow.
Rudy?
Seeing her playmate bound hand and foot, the girl immediately fired off an intermediate tier offensive spell at me without so much as an incantation. I warded it off easily enough, but on top of the silent spellcasting, the attack's power and speed were both impressive. She could easily have killed a normal person.
Damn it, Rudeus. Don't go teaching her that crap.
After handing Ghislaine my letter, I unceremoniously dumped Rudeus in the carriage and let the coachman know he was good to go. Glancing over, I saw Laws crouch next to Sylphie, speaking to her firmly but quietly.
Yeah, that's the way. It's the parents' job to teach their kid what's...
Laws had allowed Rudeus to take over many of his duties, but now he'd get the chance to reclaim his rightful role. Exhaling quietly, I watched the little family conference from a distance. After a moment, the wind carried Sylphie's voice over to me.
No. Huh? I'll get strong enough to help Rudy.
That girl really adores you, son of mine.
At this point, my 2 wives emerged from the house. I'd told them to stay inside if they wanted to watch, mostly for their own safety, but I suppose they wanted to see the boy off at least.
Oh, my sweet little Rudy's leaving me.
Be brave, madam. This is a trial we must endure.
I know. Lilia? I know, Lilia. I know. Oh, Rudeus, my little son is riding off. He's left his poor mother all alone. Woe is me.
You're not alone, madam. He's not your only child.
You're right, of course. He has 2 little sisters now.
2? Oh, madam?
Of course, Lilia. I'll love your child as much as mine. As much as I love you.
Oh, madam, I feel just the same.
For some reason, Zenith and Lilia acted out a weirdly theatrical scene as the carriage set off down the road. I suppose they weren't really too worried about Rudeus. The kid had a solid head on his shoulders, after all.
In any case, those two sure do get along these days. Wish they'd be that friendly with Daddy, too. Or at least stop ganging up on me. Still, I guess Rudeus won't be around to watch the little ones grow up, huh? I knew he'd been planning to become the best big brother ever, but things weren't going to work out that way. Tough luck, kid. Daddy's going to get all his little daughter's love. Wait a second, though. Rudeus was about to start special, accelerated training under a Sword King. 5 years from now, he would be 12. Much bigger and stronger than he was now. If we had another anything-goes scrap when he came back, was I even going to stand a chance? Oh, man. My paternal dignity was on the line. Zenith, dear, Lilia, now that Rudeus left us, I think I'll have to start training a bit as well.
Zenith glanced at me with a disinterested expression. Lilia leaned over to stage whisper in her ear.
Did it really take a near loss to make him realize that the young master might soon surpass him? Honestly, he's always like this. Never puts a bit of effort in until someone nearly embarrasses him.
Apparently, I was already somewhat lacking in the paternal dignity department. Well, what's dignity good for, anyway? My old man was a walking lump of pride and nobility, and I was never exactly fond of him. I wanted to be a friendly, lovable kind of father, not a dignified one. So for now, I'd just keep pretending to be a good-for-nothing guy with a weakness for the ladies, until my 3 kids were all grown up, at least. At this point, I glanced at Zenith out of the corner of my eye. Damn, that's a nice body. You'd never know she's already had 2 kids. Maybe we could try for 4 or 5. That's one way to earn myself an extension, I guess. Well, there was time enough to think about that later.
Thoughts ran through my mind as Rudeus's carriage rumbled off down the road.
Rudeus, believe me, this isn't how I wanted to do this either. I don't think you would have agreed to my plan, and I'm not sure I could have convinced you in an argument. Still, as your father, I couldn't just do nothing. I'm basically passing you off to someone else for now. But I think that's how it has to be. I know I didn't give you any choice, but I'm sure a clever kid like you will understand. The experiences you're going to have out there wouldn't have been possible in this village. Even if you don't understand my reasons, dealing with the challenges in front of you will make you stronger in the end. So resent me all you like. Resent me and resent yourself for letting me do this. I grew up under my old man's thumb myself, you know. Ended up just running away rather than ever facing up to him. I do regret that to some degree, and I wish I'd done some things differently. I don't want you to feel that way, of course. But you know, running away like that did make me stronger. I'm not sure if I'm stronger than my dad was, but I found women I found women I loved, protected the things I cared about, and grew tough enough to put the screws on my own kid. You want to fight back? Fine by me. Have at it. Come back stronger, kid. Strong enough to stand up to your tyrant of a dad.
Extra chapter. The mother of the Greyrat family.
My name is Zenith Greyrat. I was born in the holy country of Milas, a land noted for its long history, great beauty, and rigid moral code. By birth, I was a member of the nobility, the second daughter of a count. Like most young ladies raised in good families, I was a sheltered child. I thought the little world I knew was all there was. I was clueless and naive. But I was also a good child. If I do say so myself, I never disobeyed my parents. My grades in school were excellent. I obeyed the tenets of the Milas Church, and I learned to play the role expected of me in society gatherings. Some people even called me the perfect picture of a Milas lady. My parents were rather proud of me, I'm sure. Had things continued as they were, I suppose I would have been introduced at some party to a man my parents chose for me. Probably the first son of some marquis, well-mannered but proud, with absolute respect for the dictates of the Milas Church. I would have married this moral paragon, given birth to his children, and seen my name go down in the register of Milas nobility as a perfectly respectable marchioness. As a woman of the aristocracy, that was the road in front of me, but of course I didn't end up following it. My life changed forever on my 15th birthday, the day I came of age. I had a terrible fight with my parents. For the first time in my life, I refused to do what they told me. And I ran away from home. I'd gotten thoroughly sick of letting them control every moment of my life. My little sister Therese had always been a free spirit, and I think I was a little jealous of her as well. These factors, along with many smaller ones, combined to push me off the path I had been following. It's not easy for a fallen aristocrat to find a new road through life, but fortunately I'd learned healing magic in an academy for noble girls, and had even gotten proficient at intermediate spells. Milis was a country where healing and protection magic flourished, but it was still unusual to progress beyond the rank of beginner in either. Reaching the intermediate tier opened up the possibility of working in the Milis Church's hospitals. It was an achievement that earned me much admiration in our school. As a result, I was convinced I could make it on my own anywhere I went. I really was hopelessly naive. A dishonest group of people spotted me almost immediately as I awkwardly tried to navigate the unfamiliar process of taking a room at an inn. Claiming they'd been looking for a healer, they pulled me into their party, taking advantage of my total ignorance. The pay they offered was lower than what beginner-tier magicians earned, but they insisted it was higher than the going rate. Being a complete fool, I took their superficial kindness at face value. I actually remember thinking, I suppose the world does have some decent people in it. I'm sure they would have mistreated me further if I had stayed with them. They were probably planning to use me as a human shield in battle or force me to cast magic until I fainted, maybe even to demand sexual favors. But they didn't get the chance, thanks to a young swordsman named Paul Greyrat. After beating down my new friends, he rather forcefully dragged me into his own traveling party, until Eilani's one of his companions explained, I was convinced I'd been kidnapped by a violent thug. In any case, that was how I met my future husband. At first, I hated Paul. He was an Asuran noble by birth, but his language was coarse. He broke his promises left and right, acted impulsively, wasted money, and mocked me constantly. Not to mention that he routinely groped my butt and sometimes made highly inappropriate advances. Still, I could tell he wasn't exactly a bad person. He was always coming to my rescue after all. He made fun of my cluelessness, but in the end, he always sighed and stepped in to help. We were total opposites, but he was dependable, free-spirited, and handsome. I suppose it isn't that surprising that I grew attracted to him. Of course, there were always pretty women around him, and I was a follower of the Milis Church, which preached the virtues of monogamy. I might have run away from home, but the teachings of my faith had been drilled into me daily since I was a child, and everyone I knew in school had been a believer. Its commandments were deeply rooted in my mind. So one day, I blurted out these words. You can sleep with me, but only if you never touch any other women again. Paul immediately agreed with an easy smile. I knew he was lying to me, of course, but on some level, I didn't mind. Once he broke his promise, I thought I might be able to get over him, but once again, I'd been naive, careless, and foolish. I never even considered that I might get pregnant after a single night with him. I was so hopeless, anxious, and afraid. I certainly didn't expect that Paul would actually do the honorable thing and marry me the way he did. The child I bore him was a son, as it turned out. Rudeus Greyrat. My little Rudy.
At the moment, Rudy was crouched next to his little sister's cribs with a very serious expression on his face, so much like his father's. Frowning intently, he peered into one crib for a moment, then looked over into the other. Norn began to fuss, and Rudy's expression stiffened even further. But an instant later, blah blah blah! Nodding in satisfaction as Norn gurgled happily, Rudeus resumed his previous serious expression. This time it was Aisha who piped up out of nowhere. Rudeus immediately turned to face her, pressed his palms against his cheeks, and mumbled, Hey, Gospodo! Once again, Rudy nodded to himself with a grin of pure pleasure. He'd been keeping up this little routine for quite a while now. At the sight of Rudy's smile, I couldn't help but let out a little laugh of my own.
It wasn't something you saw every day after all. Rudy always had the most serious expression on. No matter how well things went with his sword practice or his magic, he never looked particularly satisfied. He almost never let me or Paul see him smile. And when he did, it was usually a forced, awkward grin. But now, he was making silly faces to amuse his little sisters and smiling with genuine pleasure when it worked. Just watching him put me in a pretty good mood myself. We'd come a long way from the way things used to be. I sighed quietly to myself, recalling Rudy's early years. At first, I'd been overjoyed when we discovered his talent for magic, but after a while, I'd started to feel like he was so talented that he secretly looked down on the rest of us. I wondered if he even loved his family at all. He'd never really gotten that attached to me, for one thing. But I had it all wrong, of course. I realized this in the midst of our greatest family crisis, the day Lilia announced her pregnancy, and Paul confessed that he was responsible. I felt so terribly betrayed by the both of them. So angry and so sad. In particular, I was so furious at Paul for breaking his vows to me that I felt about ready to explode. I was on the verge of either screaming, "Get out!" to Lilia or announcing that I was leaving myself. It took an effort of will to keep myself calm. Before our marriage, I'd expected Paul to prove himself a liar and planned to dump him once he did. I'd almost forgotten about that, but apparently my feelings hadn't changed. I was so upset that I was ready to break apart our family for good. But in the end, Rudy changed my mind. Playing the part of a guileless child, he stepped in to guide things to a neat conclusion. His methods weren't exactly admirable, of course, and even if I believed his little story, it certainly wouldn't have convinced me to forgive my wayward husband. Still, from Rudy's words and the expression on his face, I could see what he was really feeling, deep down inside. He was afraid, terrified his family was going to break apart. The moment I realized that, I finally understood that he did love us in his own way, and I wanted nothing more than to reassure him. My anger softened. I managed to bring myself to forgive both Paul and Lilia on the spot. If not for Rudy, things wouldn't have worked out that way.
Ooh, you're such a cutie pie, Norn. You're gonna be real pretty, just like Mommy, yeah? And now, here he was playing with Norn's little hands and smiling happily. My ever-serious little son was soothing his sister with silly baby talk.
He's so reliable. I've been a bit in awe of Rudy's talents for quite some time, but lately I was starting to appreciate his dependability as well. Things had been truly hectic after Aisha and Norm were born. Our 2 new daughters cried at all hours of the night, puked up half the milk we fed them, and routinely pooped when we were bathing them. Lilia told me all of this was perfectly natural, that it was only to be expected, but in no time, I was utterly exhausted. For days and days, I barely got a wink of sleep. But then Rudy stepped in and started to handle all sorts of things for us, without even being asked. He was oddly skillful with the babies. It almost seemed as if he'd cared for one before, although that couldn't possibly be the case. I suppose he must have picked up a few things from watching Lilia. That's our Rudy for you. I wasn't particularly happy that my son was better at soothing my own child than I was, but it was still an enormous help. I'd never seen a boy his age so helpful and reliable, or even capable of looking after newborn babies the way he did. Watching him work sometimes reminded me of my brother, who presumably still lived back in the holy country. Like Rudy, he was serious, diligent, and talented. My father always told us to learn from his example, but he was also cold to his family and ignored his little sisters almost completely. As nobles went, he was a good and honest man, but I didn't think much of him as a brother. Rudy was obviously going to be different. He was going to be a good big brother, the kind who earned his sister's admiration. That certainly seemed to be his intention, at least. He'd actually announced, "I'm gonna try to be the coolest, most perfect big brother ever," to Paul while they looked down at Norn and Aisha. I was already eager to see what the 3 of them would be like in a few years' time.
At this point, I was startled out of my reverie by Norn, who'd begun crying loudly. Rudy's body jerked in surprise, but he quickly turned to her crib to make more silly faces. This time, Norn didn't stop bawling. Rudy touched her diaper to see if it was wet, then picked her up and checked her back for rashes, but the waterworks just kept flowing.
If I'd been on my own, I probably would have gotten flustered and called for Lilia, only to fall into an outright panic once I remembered she was out shopping at the moment. But Rudy stayed admirably calm. Working by process of elimination, he checked carefully for potential problems. After a while, he clapped his hands and turned to me.
Mother, I think it's time for her milk.
Come to think of it, it was about that time of day, wasn't it? The hours really did fly when I watched Rudy playing with his sisters. Right. Of course.
Here, Have a seat. I lowered myself into the chair. Rudy pulled up for me, opened up my blouse, and took my bawling baby into my arms.
Norn had clearly been quite hungry, just as Rudy thought. She immediately pressed her little mouth to my nipple and began to suckle greedily. The sensation always made me intensely conscious of my own motherhood.
After a moment, I realized that Rudy was watching. Whenever I breastfed Norn, he tended to stare. It wasn't just a curious, innocent gaze, either. There was an element of interest you wouldn't expect from a 7-year-old.
It was cute to see him doing something so much like what Paul did. But if Rudy was already like this at his age, there was probably going to be some trouble down the line. The last thing I wanted was for him to go around breaking women's hearts right and left, the way his father had. What's the matter, Rudy? Do you want some too?
Ha! Startled by my little joke, Rudy jerked his head away and blushed a brilliant shade of red. No, that's not it. I was just impressed by how much she's drinking. It was a bit cute seeing him flustered. I couldn't help laughing a little.
Sorry, but I need my milk for Norn now. You had plenty when you were a baby, so don't be greedy now, all right?
Of course, Mother. Rudy agreed easily enough, but I saw a slight hint of regret on his face. Definitely an unusual reaction coming from him. And extremely adorable.
Maybe I'd tease him a little more. Well, if you're desperate, once you get yourself a wife, why don't you ask her if she'll give you some?
Good idea. I'll have to try that out someday. I was expecting him to get all surly and defensive at this point, but he parried my remark with a calm expression. I suppose he figured out I was just messing with him.
No fun. But that's Rudy for you, I suppose. Don't go forcing her, mind you.
Yes, I know.
It always made me feel a bit melancholy to see him acting all grown up like this.
I turned my attention back to Norn, who'd had her fill. After patting her on the back until she let out a little burp, I gently placed her back in her crib. As I wiped off my breast with a cloth, I realized Rudy was staring at me again.
Whoever does marry him might have a tough time of it. Sophie seems like the leading candidate at the moment, and that girl tends to do anything Rudy tells her to. She might not be able to say no, even when she wants to. All right then. If worst comes to worst, I'll just have to set him straight. I was Rudy's mother after all. Paul might teach him how to seduce women, but I'd teach him how to treat them right.
Norn looked quite satisfied now, she that had something in her stomach. It didn't take long for her to start nodding off in her crib.
That's the way. Drink lots of milk, get lots of sleep, and grow up nice and healthy.
Unfortunately, Aisha picked this moment to start fussing a little herself. Tearing his eyes away from my breasts, Rudy peered down into the other crib. What's the matter, Aisha? Is your back a little itchy? Just as he'd done for Norn a bit before, he picked Aisha up, checked her diaper, and looked for rashes and insect bites. But after a moment, still holding the baby in his arms, he turned to me with an uncharacteristically anxious expression. I did like seeing different emotions on Rudy's face, but I didn't want him looking that troubled very often.
What's the matter, Rudy?
Mother... Miss Lily is a little late today, isn't she?
Come to think of it, you're right. Normally, she would have returned from her shopping trip by now. Could something have happened? No. A group of merchants from the Citadel of Roa were in town. She'd mentioned she was planning to buy a bit more than usual. It was probably just taking a little longer than expected.
Well, you see, about Aisha...
Yes?
I think she's hungry too.
Oh, I see. We tended to feed our babies at the same time, so it made sense they'd both get hungry at the same time as well. Normally I breastfed Norn while Lilia took care of Aisha, but at this point, I finally understood that awkward expression on Rudy's face.
Slowly, cautiously, he continued, clearly choosing every word with care. Mother, there's no telling when Miss Lilia will get back. I'm sure Aisha could wait a while, but if she keeps crying, Norn might wake up too. So,
As a faithful member of the Millis Church, I was still unhappy with both Paul and Lilia for breaking our marriage vows. I knew they didn't subscribe to my faith, but it was never pleasant to have someone disregard your values. And Rudy had obviously picked up on all of this. He was afraid his suggestion might upset me. He was worried I might even take out my displeasure on his little sister. The boy was clearly anxious. From his perspective, Norn, Aisha, and I were all equally family. And, given where things now stood, I ought to feel the same. Still, was this really a good idea? What if breastfeeding Aisha made me feel anger or revulsion? What if Rudy saw hatred on my face and despised me for it? Oh, really now? What are you going on about, Rudy? Come on, give me Aisha.
Of course. Slowly, hesitantly, he deposited Aisha into my arms. After exposing the opposite breast from the one Norn had just been using, I lifted her up to it.
I probably would have felt a bit upset if Aisha had kicked up a fuss at this point, but she latched right onto me and started gulping down milk immediately. Too quietly for Rudy to hear, I breathed a little sigh of relief. I felt the exact same way I did when I was feeding Norn. My heart was full of a warm, pleasant awareness of my own motherhood, and nothing else. How odd. Why had I hesitated, even slightly, to bring Aisha to my breast? Why had I thought this would make me feel unhappy? Why did I think of this as some trial I had to endure? It was all so much simpler than I'd thought. I was a mother. Nothing else really mattered. Whether you're a member of the Millis Church or not, it doesn't really make a difference when it comes to things like this. She's certainly guzzling it down, isn't she?
Well, your milk is delicious, Mother.
That's an odd attempt at flattery, Rudy.
Seeing Aisha happily suckling at my breast and the contented expression on my own face, Rudy smiled with obvious relief. He clearly regarded protecting his little sisters to be his duty. Very admirable. His desire to become a good big brother worthy of their adoration seemed to be quite genuine.
It's not flattery. I still remember how it tasted.
Do you really now?
Chuckling softly, I reached down to stroke Aisha's little head. After a while, she finished up and took her mouth from my breast. Only moments later, she was nodding off in my arms, so I lowered her back into her crib. Rudy watched from a distance, his gaze warmer than usual.
Hey, Rudy.
Yes, what is it?
Mind if I stroke your head a bit?
You don't need to ask my permission. Feel free to pet me any time. After slowly sitting at my side, Rudy leaned his head toward me invitingly. I reached down and began to stroke it gently.
Rudy was our first child, and he never needed much from us. Most of the time, I didn't feel like I was much of a parent to him. But recently, that had begun to change. I truly was this boy's mother, and he truly was my son.
Sensing a bit of warmth, I turned in its direction. Spring sunshine was streaming in through the window. Outside, golden fields of wheat stretched out as far as the eye could see. It was the picture of a peaceful spring afternoon. As I gazed quietly out at it, a sense of happiness washed over me.
For some reason, I felt utterly content. I wish this moment could last forever.
Me too. I suppose he also found this little domestic scene pleasantly tranquil, but it was only thanks to him that I could feel the same. If he hadn't intervened, as a pious member of the Millis Church reduced to one wife of two, I would probably have stormed out of this house with Norn, cursing my misfortune. Or stayed behind, perhaps to take out my resentment on Lilia and Aisha. Thank goodness for Rudy. If he wasn't such a wise and clever little boy, I never would have experienced this blissful moment.
Rudy,
Yes, Mother!
thank you for being born.
Startled, Rudy looked up at me. After an awkward pause, he scratched his head and answered in an adorably bashful tone of voice.
Well, thank you for having me. My only reply was another chuckle of amusement.